Welcome back to Potter Eclipse, where tonight's What If pulls Harry into a household with a distinctly darker sense of humor. What if Uncle Fester and Thing raised Harry while Wednesday trained him in the dark arts? If you haven't already, go ahead and smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so no future story ever slips past you. Settle in and let's begin. Chapter 1. The Foundling in the Rain. The storm had been following the hearse for 40 miles, and Gomez Adams considered this the finest hospitality Surrey had offered all night. "Listen to it, Tish," he said, one gloved hand on the wheel and the other flung toward the streaming windshield. "It wants us to stay." Morticia Adams sat beside him in the black car, pale as a lily left too long in a vase, watching the rain drown the neat little houses of a neat little town. Everything here had been trimmed. The hedges wore square corners. The lawns had the anxious green of things that were watered on a schedule and never once allowed to die with dignity. "It's a terrible place," she murmured. "The gardens are so healthy." "Grim," Gomez agreed happily. In the back seat, 3 children and a severed hand rode in the dark. Wednesday Adams, 7 years old and already disappointed by most of the century, sat with her spine perfectly vertical and her hands folded on a book about embalming. Beside her, Pugsley cradled a paper sack of something that ticked. Between them on the velvet, Thing lay curled and drowsing, fingers twitching now and then at whatever hands dream about. They had been to an estate auction 3 counties over, where a dead collector's cabinet of poisons had gone under the gavel, and Morticia had come away with 2 blue bottles and a mood of quiet triumph. The drive home should have been simple. But Gomez did not believe in maps, considering them a failure of romance, and so the family had wandered off the motorway and into the veins of Little Winging, where the street lamps buzzed and the houses were numbered in the hope that numbers could save them. The hearse slowed at the mouth of a street called Privet Drive. "Number 4, Morticia read from a gatepost, and her voice curved around the words as though tasting spoiled wine. Gomez stopped the car. He stopped the car. He would have stopped the car for almost anything Morticia said in that voice, which was one of the reasons their marriage had lasted so long and buried so many others. He put the hearse in park in the middle of the empty road, and the wipers went on beating and the rain went on falling, and there on the front step of number 4 Privet Drive sat a wicker basket. Something in the basket moved. "Cara mia," Gomez breathed. "Someone has left it out in the rain," Morticia said. She was already reaching for the door handle. How careless, how cruel, how intriguing. Thing woke, sensed a purpose, and drummed twice against the seat. They went out into the weather together, the whole family, because the Adamses did nothing important alone. Gomez opened Morticia's door and held over her a black umbrella that had belonged to a hanging judge. Wednesday stepped down into a puddle and did not flinch. Pugsley set his ticking sack on the seat with the tenderness of a boy parting from a pet and followed. Thing scuttled ahead across the wet pavement on its fingertips, quick and certain, and reached the basket first. There was a baby in it. He could not have been more than 15 months old. He was wrapped in a blanket that had gone gray with rain, and he was awake, and he was not crying, which was the first thing about him that any of the Adamses respected. He looked up at the ring of pale faces leaning over him, the tall woman in black, the man with the bright mustache, the little girl with the level stare, the round boy, the hand, and he did not scream. He reached up with one small fist and took hold of Thing's index finger, and he held on. Thing went very still. "Well," said Morticia softly, "the baby had a scar on his forehead. It ran down from the hairline in a clean, deliberate stroke, the shape of lightning, the kind of mark a person could not have given himself." Morticia brushed the wet hair from it with 2 fingers, and the child turned his face into her hand and sighed, and the rain came down harder, as if applauding. "A foundling," Gomez said, and the word cracked in half with joy. "Tish, we've been given a foundling, on a doorstep, in a storm. Do you know how long I have wanted this to happen to us?" "It's our honeymoon," Morticia said, "since before that." Wednesday leaned over the basket and studied the baby with the flat, praising attention she otherwise reserved for spiders and closed caskets. The baby studied her back. Neither of them blinked. It was, by Adam's standards, love at first sight, though of a variety that would take some years and a great deal of fencing to explain. "He didn't cry," Wednesday said, "even when the water hit him." "No," said Morticia, "he's not afraid of Thing. No. He gripped the finger before he cried for the mother." Wednesday straightened. "The mother is gone. Look at the step. No one has come to the window. The house is asleep and the child was put outside it." She said this without heat, the way another child might announce that it was Tuesday. "He was left here to be found by whoever found him." "And we found him," Gomez said. "And we found him," Wednesday agreed. There was a letter. It had been tucked against the baby's blanket, sealed with a blob of green wax pressed with a crest, and gone soft and pulpy in the wet. Morticia lifted it out with 2 fingers, a wet thing fished from a drain, and held it to the streetlight, and read what the rain had not yet eaten. The handwriting was thin and old and very sure of itself. It addressed a Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of that house. It regretted to inform them of a death, 2 deaths, and it explained in the calm, unhurried tone of a man accustomed to being obeyed that the child was their nephew, that he was to be raised in their care, that there were protections woven into the arrangement which depended entirely on the boy remaining beneath their roof, that they were not to ask questions, and that in due course all would be made clear. It was signed with a great looping flourish, a name like a peacock. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Morticia read the letter twice. Then she folded it once along the soft crease the rain had already begun and looked at the dark windows of number 4, behind which a family slept who had been sent a child in the night and had left him on the step like a bottle of milk. They knew he was coming, she said. And they put him outside, Gomez said, and the joy went out of his voice and something colder came into it, something the mustache did not soften. There are protections, Morticia read again from memory, which depend upon the boy remaining beneath this roof. She looked down at the baby, who had fallen asleep with Thing's finger still in his fist, rain on his eyelashes, entirely unprotected and entirely calm. They left the roof open to the sky and put the protected thing under it. I have met neglect before. I have never seen it done on instruction. Wednesday reached out and with a care that would have astonished anyone who had watched her drown her brother's toy soldiers that morning, drew the wet blanket up over the baby's shoulder. We're not leaving him here, she said. It was not a question. Wednesday did not ask questions she already intended to answer. No, my little scorpion, said Morticia, we are not. Gomez looked once more at the sleeping house, and something in his face promised the house a future it would not enjoy, and then he bent and lifted the basket in both arms as tenderly as a man lifting the last flower off a grave. The baby did not wake. Thing rode along on the rim of the basket, refusing to give the finger back. Home, Gomez said. They left the letter on the step, weighted with a stone, so that whoever came to the window in the morning would understand that they had lost something, and that they had not deserved to keep it in the first place. The Adams house did not so much sit on its hill as loom over it, brooding, a great black wedding cake of a mansion with a wrought iron fence and a garden that ate small mammals. Lightning liked the house. It struck the weather vane on principle. As the hearse climbed the drive, the whole building flickered into and out of the dark, gables and turrets and one round window lit gold at the top of the tallest tower where Grandmama was doing something to a chicken. Lurch opened the door before they reached it. He was 7 feet of grave-colored butler, and he took one look at the basket in Gomez's arms and made a sound like a cathedral clearing its throat. Yes, Lurch, Morticia said, sweeping past him in a trail of black silk. A baby. We found him on a doorstep, warm milk, I think, in the small coffin from the nursery, the one with the good hinges. Lurch groaned agreement and went to see about the milk. They laid the baby on the long table in the parlor, under the chandelier that dripped candle wax onto the floor in patterns Morticia found soothing. The whole household gathered. Grandmama came down from the tower, still wearing her apron and smelling of sulfur and rosemary, and she elbowed her way to the table with the confidence of a woman who had delivered 9 babies and buried most of them at a profit. Let me see him, she cackled. Oh, he's a scrawny one, look at those wrists, you could snap them like breadsticks. She said it with vast approval. She poked the baby in the belly with one crooked finger, and the baby, waking, grabbed the finger and gummed it. Grandmama howled with delight. He bites, he's got the instinct. Fester, Fester, come and look what the storm dragged in. There was a rumble beneath the floor. The Adams house had many things beneath its floor, most of them intentional, and one of them was Uncle Fester, who had been in the cellar since Thursday conducting what he called an experiment and everyone else called a fire hazard. The rumble became a clatter. The clatter became footsteps on the cellar stair. And then the parlor door banged open and Uncle Fester stood in it, round and gray and grinning, wearing a heavy black coat singed at both sleeves, his bald head reflecting the chandelier, his little eyes enormous behind their pouches, a length of copper wire still wrapped around one wrist and sparking faintly. Did somebody say storm? Fester bellowed. Did somebody say the storm dragged something in? Because I have been trying to conduct lightning through a dead cat all evening, and I'll tell you, it is not cooperating. He stopped. He had seen the baby. Every large emotion that Uncle Fester possessed, and he possessed them all in the largest available size, crossed his face at once in a traffic jam. His grin trembled. His eyes, already large, achieved an impossible new roundness. He crept toward the table on his toes, the copper wire trailing sparks behind him, and he leaned over the baby, and the baby looked up at the strange, bald, delighted man leaning over him, and did the single most important thing that had happened in the Adams house in a decade. He laughed. He laughed at Uncle Fester's face. He reached up both fat little hands and patted Uncle Fester's cheeks, and he laughed, a wet, burbling baby laugh. The laugh of a child shown the funniest and finest thing in the world. Uncle Fester made a noise no one in the family had ever heard him make. It was very small. It came from somewhere under the coat, under the singe marks, under all the dynamite in all the years, and it was the sound of a man who had been the strangest thing in every room he had ever entered, discovering at last someone who thought he was wonderful. Oh, said Uncle Fester. Oh no, Fester, said Gomez. No, Fester said again, and his voice wobbled, and he put out one thick finger, and the baby seized it in the fist not currently holding Thing, so that now the child held a severed hand in one hand and Uncle Fester in the other, and would not let either of them go. Gomez, he's got me, Gomez, I can't. You can't ask me to put him down, I won't do it, I'll fight the whole village, I'll electrify the fence. Nobody is asking you to put him down, Morticia said gently. I'll live in the cellar with him, I'll teach him everything, I'll teach him about volts. Fester's eyes were streaming now, and he did not appear to notice, and no one mentioned it because the Adamses understood that some kinds of leaking were sacred. Look at him, Gomez, look what somebody just left in the rain. Who leaves this in the rain? Cowards, said Wednesday. Cowards, Fester agreed, delighted to have the word. The baby laughed again, and things, still gripped, tapped out a slow, pleased rhythm against the tabletop. And Grandmama produced from her apron a bottle of warm milk that Lurch had heated and possibly improved. And the household of Adams stood in a ring around the long parlor table under the dripping chandelier and looked down at the child the wizarding world had left on a step, and every one of them, in their own peculiar and unspeakable way, decided the same thing at the same moment without needing to say it aloud. They were keeping him. Later, when the baby had been fed and the storm had settled to a companionable drizzle, they held a proper council, because keeping a foundling was a serious matter and the Adamses took very few things seriously but did those few things thoroughly. They sat in the great hall around the fireplace that could roast an ox and had. Morticia occupied the tall black chair. Gomez stood at her shoulder. Grandmama took the hearthstone. Wednesday and Pugsley sat on the floor with the basket between them, and Fester would not leave the basket's side and had wedged himself against it so that his shoulder made a wall the baby could lean on. Thing perched on the basket rim. Lurch stood in the doorway, which was where Lurch stood. Morticia read the wet letter aloud so that everyone should understand the terms of the thing they were about to defy. His name, she said at the end, according to this, is Harry Potter. She let the two words fall into the firelight. His mother and father are dead. There was a war, it seems, among people of our inclination. He survived it. This scar is where he survived it. She touched her own forehead in the place where the baby was marked. And a man named Dumbledore decided that the safest place in the world for a child who had survived a war was a house full of people who would leave him on the step. I don't like this Dumbledore, Grandmama announced. You don't know this Dumbledore, said Gomez. I don't like him, Grandmama repeated, and I don't need to know him. I have a nose for men who arrange other people's children on doorsteps. My third husband was one. I put him in the garden. He's doing very well. He's a rhododendron now. There's a question before us, Morticia said in the voice that meant the frivolity was over and the family should attend. She looked around the ring of firelit faces. This is not a stray cat. Somewhere there are people who know this child exists, powerful people. People who make protections and put them in letters. If we keep him, they will come for him one day when it suits them. There will be a reckoning, perhaps a war of our own. She paused. She looked one by one at the faces of the people she loved most in the poisoned world. I want each of you to understand that before we decide. We would not be taking in a baby. We would be taking in a fight. The fire cracked. Somewhere in the walls, something the family had named Cousin Its Male scuttled and was still. Gomez was the first to speak, and he spoke quietly, which for Gomez was a kind of thunder. A child, he said, was handed to people who had a duty to love him, and they put him outside in the cold on the calculation that protections would hold him where affection wouldn't. He drew the saber he was never entirely without and looked along its edge in the firelight. I have killed men in duels for smaller failures of hospitality. Kirita, you ask if we want the fight. I have wanted this fight since I read that letter on the step. I only did not know who to have it with. Now I do. Gomez, Morticia said, and it was a whole sentence, and it meant everything. I want him, said Fester from the floor, not loudly for once. He had the baby's fist in his again. Nobody ever needed me for anything except the wiring. He needs somebody to think he's funny. I can do that. I'm very funny. Ask anybody who survived me. He's small and he doesn't scream, and he already tried to bite me, said Grandmama. In my professional opinion, he's got excellent bones and a future in something illegal. Keep him. Pugsley, who was a boy of few words and many detonations, said, Can I show him the crossbow? When he can hold his head up, Morticia allowed, and then everyone looked at Wednesday. Wednesday had not spoken during the council. She had sat on the floor with her hands folded and her dark eyes moving, now to the letter, now to the baby, now to the fire, doing the sums that Wednesday was always doing behind the flat little door of her face. When the room turned to her, she did not hurry. She reached into the basket and let the baby take her finger, and she watched him hold it, and she seemed to be conducting some private test whose results she alone would ever know. He was in a war before he could walk, she said at last, and he lived. Everyone who was supposed to protect him has already failed. The man in the letter thinks a house and some words will keep him safe. She looked up, and the firelight found nothing warm in her face, and yet the whole family understood her perfectly, because they had learned to read Wednesday the way other families read weather. A house won't keep him safe. Words won't keep him safe. The only thing that has ever kept anyone in this family safe is knowing how to be dangerous, and knowing that the people around you are more dangerous than the people who want you. Wednesday, Morticia said with love. I'll teach him, Wednesday said. Everything, the blade, the poisons, the science, the way to fall so it doesn't kill you, the way to stand so no one notices you, the way to make people underestimate you until it's too late for them to reconsider. She looked down at Harry Potter, 15 months old, holding her finger in the firelight with a grip that a child that age should not have had. He held on before he cried. That's the whole of it. That's the only lesson that matters, and he already knows it. The rest is just technique. She was quiet a moment. Then, in exactly the flat voice she had used for all the rest of it, she said the most extravagant thing Wednesday Adams had ever said about anyone. He'll be worth the trouble. And that settled it. They did not adopt Harry Potter that night, because there were no papers for such a thing, and the Adamses had a complicated relationship with papers. But Morticia went to the great cabinet where the family records were kept, the enormous black ledger bound in something she never named, and she opened it to the page where the living members of the household were listed in a long descending column of spidery ink, and she took up the raven feather quill, and beneath Wednesday and Pugsley she wrote in her own hand a new line. Harry. She considered the surname a while. Potter belonged to two people in the ground who had died fighting to keep him, and Morticia would not take that from him. It was his, and he would carry it, and one day he would understand what it had cost. But there was room in the world, she thought, for a boy to belong to more than one family, especially when the first had loved him enough to die and the second intended to love him enough to make sure no one else got the chance. She wrote after his name a second word, Adams. She closed the ledger. Something in the house sighed contentedly all through its beams, and settled and accepted him, the way old houses accept the people they mean to keep. Harry Potter Adams spent his first night in the mansion in a coffin. It was, everyone was at pains to explain over the following years, a very good coffin. It was the nursery coffin kept for exactly such occasions, small and satin-lined and fitted with brass hinges of the highest quality, and it had rocked 3 generations of Adams' infants to sleep. Fester carried it up himself and would let no one else touch it. He set it beside his own room, which the family found irregular, because Fester's room was down a stone corridor near the cellar and was full of things that hummed. But no one argued, because they had all seen Fester's face in the parlor, and there are some claims of family honors without a vote. Fester did not sleep that first night. He sat on the floor by the little coffin with his singed coat wrapped around him and one hand resting on the edge, and every time the baby stirred he leaned over and made his face do something ridiculous, crossing his eyes or working his ears or lighting a small bulb he kept in his cheek for emergencies, so that the baby would laugh instead of cry. Down the corridor the house creaked. Rain ticked at the high windows. Once near dawn, Fester began, very quietly in a rusty, unused voice, to sing. It was not a lullaby anyone else would have recognized as a lullaby. It had been, in its original form, a song about a shipwreck in which everyone drowned. But Fester sang it slow and low, and he changed the ending, so that in his version one small sailor washed up alive on a black shore and was found by people who were glad, and the baby fell asleep to it with 2 fingers in his mouth and his other hand curled around Fester's thumb. Thing did not sleep either. Thing spent the night on patrol. It made a circuit of the corridor on its fingertips, checking the windows, checking the door, checking the deep places where the house kept its darknesses, and satisfying itself that none of them meant the small new person any harm. Toward morning it came and settled on the rim of the coffin, and there it kept the last watch, 5 fingers folded together into something very like a fist, ready. Morticia looked in once in the gray of first light, drawn down the corridor by an instinct she trusted. She stood in the doorway in her long black gown and watched her mad brother-in-law asleep at last with his head pillowed on the edge of a baby's coffin, and the severed hand keeping guard, and the child breathing slow and easy in the middle of it all, unafraid, already home. She did not go in. Some scenes are complete, and to enter them is to break them. She only stood a while, and then she went to find Gomez, and to tell him that the family had grown by one, and that she had never in her life been so pleased to be defied by fate. Wednesday began his education the next morning. She came to the coffin while Fester was still snoring against it, and she looked down at Harry, awake now, watching the ceiling with the grave attention he gave everything, and she said, in the tone of a general accepting a recruit, "You don't know it yet, but you're mine to make. Fester will love you, he can't help it, he's soft in the middle, Thing will guard you, Grandmama will feed you things that aren't food, Mother and Father will teach you to be a person, but I'm going to teach you to survive, and one day something is going to come for you out of that letter, and when it does you're going to be ready, because I refuse to lose the only interesting thing that's happened to this family since the plague." Harry looked at her. Then he smiled, a wide, gummy, conspiratorial smile that took in every word and agreed to all of it, and he reached up out of the coffin toward her, and Wednesday Adams, who had never once in her 7 years reached back for anyone, hesitated and looked around to make sure no one was watching and reached back. He took her finger, he held on. "Good," Wednesday said quietly. "That's lesson 1, you already have it, we'll do the rest in order." The first weeks reorganized the whole house around him, the way a garden reorganizes itself around a new grave. Nobody planned it. The Adamses were not a planning people. But by the end of the second week there was a coffin crib in 3 different rooms because no one could agree who got to keep him nearest, and Lurch had learned to carry a bottle in one enormous hand without spilling it, and Grandmama had begun what she referred to darkly as the assessments. The assessments were Grandmama's method of finding out what a baby was made of, and they involved things that would have emptied a hospital ward, and Harry passed every one of them with a burble. She held him upside down by the ankles to see if he would panic. He giggled and tried to grab her nose. She set him on the cold flagstones of the kitchen floor in nothing but a diaper to test his constitution, and he crawled directly to the hearth where the cauldron simmered, hauled himself up on the andiron, and reached for the fire with the frank curiosity of a scholar. Grandmama snatched him back an inch from the flames and cackled until she wheezed. Fearless, she announced to the kitchen. No sense of self-preservation whatsoever. He'll fit right in. He should have a little sense of self-preservation, Morticia said from the doorway without heat. Wednesday didn't have any either at that age, Grandmama said. She turned out fine, she's terrifying. That's true, Morticia allowed, pleased. Lurch took to the baby in his own cathedral way. He had opened the door to a great many things across the years, most of them uninvited, and a foundling was the first arrival in a long while that made the enormous butler do the thing he did instead of smiling, which was to incline his gray head a full inch and produce, from somewhere in the depths of his coat, a rattle he had carved himself from a curtain ring and a length of blackthorn, and press it upon the child with the gravity of a coronation. Harry took the rattle, shook it, found it satisfyingly grim, and from that hour regarded Lurch as a personal fixed point, so that whenever the household grew too loud, which was always, the baby would turn and look for the tall, still shape by the door and settle at the sight of it, the one calm thing in a house that had no others. Pugsley, for his part, held a private ceremony of his own devising in the garden, involving a spade, a solemn oath, and the burial of a toy soldier as a sacrifice to whatever powers looked after new brothers, and came in muddy and satisfied and announced that it was done. The baby was official, the ground had accepted the offering, and no one asked which ground or what it had accepted, because in that family such questions were considered rude. Morticia took over the feeding herself because she found the ritual soothing, and because the nursery, when she sat in it with the child on her knee, and the black roses in the window box breathing their heavy scent through the shutters, was the only room in the house where the world went quiet. She would speak to him while he ate, low and unhurried, in the velvet voice she used for the things she meant. She told him the truth, all of it, in words too old for him, because she believed children absorbed truth through the skin long before they had language, and lies the same way, and she intended him to grow up soaked in the former. You are wanted here, she told him over and over in 100 small variations on 100 gray afternoons. Whatever else you learn to doubt, do not learn to doubt that. Your first family loved you enough to die. This one loves you enough to be dangerous about it. You will never once in your life have to earn your place under this roof. It is already yours. It was yours the moment we found you in the rain. Harry did not understand the words, but he learned the voice, and the voice never once wavered, and a child who is told the same true thing in the same steady voice 1,000 times before he can speak grows a floor under himself that nothing in later life can quite pull up. Fester took the nights. He insisted on it with a ferocity that surprised the family, who had never known Fester to insist on anything except louder explosions. He moved a cot into the corridor by the coffin crib and slept there badly, springing up at every sound to peer over the rim. He was, it developed, an inventive and deeply unsafe caretaker. He built Harry a mobile to hang over the crib, and it was made of small polished skulls of indeterminate origin that rotated when you cranked a handle, and it played a music box tune that had originally accompanied an execution, and Harry adored it and reached for the little skulls and laughed when they spun. Fester wired a nightlight that ran on a potato and glowed an unwholesome green. He read Harry bedtime stories from a book of famous shipwrecks, doing all the voices, drowning all the sailors, and Harry drifted off to the cadence of catastrophe told by a man who loved him. Thing became the boy's shadow. Where Harry went, Thing went, riding on the crib rail, patrolling the perimeter, fetching dropped rattles and lost socks, and on one memorable occasion, a live scorpion the child had taken a fancy to, and which Thing confiscated with a firm parental tap before anyone was stung. When Harry cried in the small hours and Fester slept too deep to hear, it was Thing that woke and crept up the blanket and patted the small heaving back, tap, 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 steady as a clock, until the crying stopped. There is a particular loneliness in being a hand with no body, no voice, no face to be smiled at. Thing had carried it a long time. And now there was a person very small, who did not find a disembodied hand frightening or strange, but simply useful and dear, who reached for it in the dark and held on, and Thing would have gone through fire for that, and later, more than once, very nearly did. Wednesday delivered lesson 2 before the month was out. She waited until the house was asleep, and she took Harry from the crib without waking Fester, which was itself a lesson she was privately administering to herself in stealth, and she carried him down to the conservatory where the carnivorous plants leaned toward the moon. She sat on the cold tiles with him in her lap, facing the largest of the plants, a thing called Cleopatra with a mouth like a bear trap and an appetite the family indulged. This is Cleopatra, Wednesday told him. She eats meat. She would eat you if I let her, and she wouldn't feel bad about it because that is her nature and she is honest about it. Most dangerous things aren't honest about it. That's the difference you're going to spend your life learning to see. She held him just out of the plant's reach, and Cleopatra swayed, and Harry watched the swaying jaws with enormous solemn eyes and did not cry. You see, you're not afraid of the honest ones. Good, save your fear for the polite ones. The polite ones are the ones that leave you in the rain. Harry reached out one hand toward the swaying plant, not to touch it, only to greet it, and Cleopatra, to the family's lasting astonishment when Wednesday reported it at breakfast, went still and bent her terrible jaws down, slow, and did not bite, and let the small hand rest a moment against the green, and then straightened up again, satisfied, and something between them had been agreed. He introduced himself to the man-eating plant, Wednesday said over her porridge the next morning, and it liked him. Of course it did, said Gomez, misty with pride. He's an Adams. Gomez marked the occasion in his own way 3 days later, when the child could sit up unsupported and glare at things, which Gomez considered the minimum qualification for what he had in mind. He carried Harry down to the long gallery where the family blades hung, 100 years of edged devotion racked along the stone, foils and sabers, and one cutlass that had settled an argument at a wedding. He walked Harry down the row and named each one like an old friend, which several of them were. At the end he took down the lightest foil, a slim length of Toledo steel worn to a silver whisper, and he balanced it across 2 fingers so the point hung level with the baby's astonished face. This one was my father's, Gomez told him, and his mother's before that, and one day, my boy, if you're very lucky and very quick, it will argue on your behalf. He let Harry reach out and close one fist around the guard. The blade dipped right it held. Gomez's mustache lifted. Grip like that on a foil at your age. Tish, come and see, he's a natural. He'll be running me through by 6. Not before he can walk, Gomez, Morticia called from the doorway. Details, said Gomez, and he set the foil back on its hooks with a bow. The way a man bows to a partner he intends to dance with again, and he carried Harry back up to the light with the ancestral steel gleaming behind them both, and something in the gallery, some patient, watchful thing that lived in old weapons and old houses, seemed to approve. Pugsley approved too, in his fashion. He waited until no adult was near and presented Harry with a gift of his own, a small brass casing polished to a shine, entirely spent and therefore, by Pugsley's lights, entirely appropriate for a baby. Harry took it, considered it, and put the whole thing in his mouth. Thing intervened at once, plucking it out, and there followed a brief silent negotiation between hand and boy that ended with the casing living on the crib rail where Harry could look at it and not eat it, a compromise that satisfied the entire nursery. Morning came the way mornings came to the Adams house, reluctantly, filtered through curtains the color of a bruise. Grandmama made breakfast, which was inadvisable, and Harry ate it, which was remarkable, and everyone agreed this proved something. Gomez read the newspaper for the obituaries, which he called the society pages, and found 3 names he knew and toasted them with brandy. Pugsley detonated something small and educational in the garden. Lurch answered a door that no one had knocked on, which was Lurch's way of being certain. And in a neat house 40 miles away, on a neat street, a large red-faced man opened his front door in his dressing gown to fetch the milk and found, waited under a stone, a wet green-sealed letter and no basket at all, and stood there a very long time growing paler and paler until his wife came to see what was the matter, and the 2 of them looked at the empty step and at each other and made without a single word a mutual and permanent decision never to speak of it, never to inquire. Never to breathe one syllable of the fact that a child had been left in their care and had vanished in the night, and they had been, on the whole, relieved. They did not know who had taken him. They would spend the rest of their small, square lives not knowing and being glad, and telling themselves it was none of their business, and they would be right, because it had stopped being their business the moment they left him out in the rain. Far to the north, in a round office at the top of a tower in a castle that hid itself from ordinary eyes, a very old man with a very long beard sat behind a desk cluttered with silver instruments, and one of those instruments, a small delicate thing of glass and spinning brass that he had set to watch over a particular boy in a particular house, gave a soft chime and stopped. He looked at it over his half-moon spectacles. He tapped it. It did not resume. The instrument had been keyed to the child's blood and the house's threshold, and it had been designed to spin for 17 years, quietly confirming, day after day, that the boy remained where he had been placed, safe behind protections woven from his mother's death. It had spun for a single night. Now it sat inert on the old man's desk, its brass gone still, and the old man frowned and made a note, and told himself there were 100 small reasons an instrument might falter, and that he would look into it in the morning, and that all was almost certainly well. He was wrong about nearly all of that. But it would take him 10 years to find out how wrong, and by then the child would no longer be a child he could arrange, and the family that had taken him would no longer be a family he could reason with, and the fight that Morticia Adams had promised her household by the fire would be very near, and coming fast, on small, quick feet, carrying a fencing foil and a cup of tea that was not tea at all. For now, though, the instrument sat dead on the northern desk, and the man behind it went back to his silver machines, and 40 miles south of nowhere the boy he had lost sat in a high black chair at a long table in a house that ate the light, wearing a bib grandmama had embroidered with a skull. Harry banged a silver spoon against the wood and laughed at Uncle Fester making the light bulb glow in his mouth. Thing brought him a second helping of something that should not have been on a menu. Wednesday watched him from across the table with the fixed attention of a girl studying a weapon she meant to spend her life learning to wield, and made a note in the small black book she had started keeping that his grip strength was improving. Gomez leaned to Morticia's ear beneath the roar of it all. "We're going to make an extraordinary person out of that child, cara mia." "No," Morticia said, watching Harry catch a flung grape from Fester one-handed and eat it with tremendous seriousness. "We're going to feed him and love him and teach him the blade, and he's going to make an extraordinary person out of himself. All we have to do is not leave him in the rain." Down the table, Harry held up the caught grape between two fingers like a trophy, and looked around the whole loud, impossible room to be certain somebody had seen, and every single person in it and the hand was already looking. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, the curriculum. By the time Harry was 7, he could escape from a locked steamer trunk in under 90 seconds, and Wednesday considered this remedial. "You panicked at the 60-second mark," she said, standing over the trunk with her stopwatch and her clipboard while Harry climbed out, damp and triumphant, the trick handcuffs dangling open from one wrist. "Your pulse jumped. I could hear it in the way you scrabbled." A man who scrabbles in a box is a man who has already told his captors everything they need to know. "There was a spider on my face," Harry said. "There is always a spider on your face. That is the point of the exercise." She clicked the stopwatch and wrote a number in the small black book she had kept since the week he arrived, the one whose pages now ran to a full accounting of his grip strength, his breath control, his tolerance for the dark, and the exact volume of grandmama's cooking he could eat without visible distress. "We'll do it again after lunch, in the water tank." This was a normal morning. The Adams house ran on its own weather, gray and pleasant, thunder for rooster. Harry had never known any other kind of morning and would not have traded it for the sun. He got up when the grandfather clock in the hall struck a number it had invented. He washed in water Lurch drew from a well that was possibly enchanted and definitely cold, and he came down to breakfast that no medical authority would have endorsed, and that had, over 6 years, made him quick and lean, and entirely unbothered by things that made other children cry. He was small for his age, dark-haired, green-eyed behind the round spectacles grandmama had ground him from the lenses of an old opera glass, and he wore that particular morning a black jumper Morticia had knitted and a foil scabbard he was not yet allowed to fill. He was, by every measure that mattered in that house, thriving. Fester had him first most days because Fester rose before dawn and could not bear to begin the day without showing Harry something dangerous. Harry. Came the bellow up the cellar stair every morning, joyful as a foghorn. "Harry, come down, I've done something to the boiler and I want a witness in case it's marvelous." Harry came down. He always came down. The cellar was the best room in a house full of good rooms, low and stone and strung with more wire than a telephone exchange, and in the middle of it Uncle Fester presided over his workbench like a mad gray pope, sleeves rolled, fingertips permanently a little scorched, surrounded by devices that hummed and clicked and occasionally begged for mercy. That morning the boiler wore a new copper hat of Fester's design, and from the hat ran a cable to a chair, and in the chair sat a department store mannequin Fester had named Gerald. "Watch Gerald," Fester whispered. "Gerald is going to teach you about grounding." He threw the switch. There was a sound felt in the teeth. Blue light crawled up the cable, poured into Gerald, and set every hair on the mannequin's cheap wig standing straight up, and then a single spark leapt off Gerald's plastic nose, arced across the cellar, and put itself out in a bucket of water with a hiss and a wisp of steam. Fester turned to Harry, luminous. Do you see, electricity always wants to go home. It doesn't care about Gerald. Gerald's just the road. You find where it wants to go and you stand somewhere else." He held up one finger, sooty and sincere. "Whole schools of philosophy in that, Harry, whole schools. Most people spend their lives being Gerald. Don't be Gerald. Don't be Gerald," Harry repeated and meant it, because he had learned early that Fester's lessons sounded ridiculous and turned out, years later, to be the only ones that saved his life. Thing came down the wall to fetch them for the next thing, tapping the stone in the code Harry had learned before he could read, a quick, precise rhythm that meant Wednesday is waiting and you are already late. Thing had been Harry's first teacher, though nobody called it that. A hand cannot lecture. A hand can only demonstrate and correct and refuse to give up, and Thing had done all three across 6 years with the patience of something that had nothing but time. It had taught Harry to tie 40 kinds of knot and untie all of them behind his back. It had taught him sleight, the palming of coins and keys, and once, memorably, a live beetle, so that Harry's small, quick fingers now moved with a deftness that made adults check their pockets after he shook their hands. It had taught him to write with either hand and to pick a simple lock with a hairpin and to catch a dropped teacup before it struck the floor, this last by dropping teacups at him without warning for a year, until catching became something his body did without asking his mind. Harry loved Thing the uncomplicated way you love someone who has never once been too busy for you. When Thing rode on his shoulder through the house, the two of them communicated in a private grammar of taps and finger flicks that no one else in the family had fully cracked, and Wednesday, who disliked being excluded from anything, pretended not to mind and minded enormously. Sundays belonged to Fester, entirely and by ancient treaty, and Fester spent them the way a boy spends a birthday. He would load Harry and a great deal of equipment into a wheelbarrow before anyone else was up and trundle down through the black garden to the family bog, a wide flat sheet of tea-colored water where the fishing was excellent and the fish were regrettable. There Fester conducted what he called angling, and what involved, at no point, a rod. Patience is for people who don't own dynamite, Fester explained, as he did every Sunday, lowering a small red stick tenderly into the water on the end of a wire. Now, safety first, Harry. Safety is very important. Are you behind the rock? I'm behind the rock. Am I behind the rock? No, Uncle Fester. Marvelous, said Fester, and there was a sound that flattened the reeds for 30 feet, and a column of bog water stood up briefly like a startled ghost, and when it came down there were fish, and there was Fester upside down in a bush, blackened and grinning, his coat smoking gently, entirely unharmed because nothing had ever harmed Fester and nothing ever would. The universe had tried for 50 years and given up. Harry hauled him out of the bush by the ankles, the way Grandmama had once dangled Harry, and Fester sat up covered in weeds and laughed until the crows left the trees. Those Sunday mornings taught Harry nothing he could have named and everything that mattered. They taught him that a person could be strange and loud and dangerous and also completely, unshakably kind, that the two were not opposites, that the man who set off dynamite in a bog was the same man who sat up with him through fevers and slept badly for years in a cold corridor so a baby would not wake alone. Fester never once told Harry he loved him, because the word embarrassed him and seemed too small besides. He only said every Sunday, hauling his tackle back up the hill with a boy at his side and a basket of illegal fish, "Best day of the week this, best day of the week." And Harry, who understood exactly what was being said, agreed every time. Wednesday was 13 now and taller and if anything more herself, which the family had not thought possible. She had turned her tutoring of Harry into an institution. There was a schedule hand-lettered in an ink she made from oak galls, pinned to the door of the old ballroom she had annexed as a training sal. It listed the disciplines by the names she had given them, and the names were half the education. Falling, standing, the blade, the cup, the voice from the other side, being boring by which one escapes notice. And at the bottom underlined twice, composure, which she considered the master skill, the one all the others served. "You cannot fight, hide, poison, or negotiate," she told him on the first day of every term in exactly the same words, "if you lose your composure. A person who keeps their composure while the room comes apart has already won because everyone else is busy being Gerald." She had adopted the Gerald principle from Fester and never once credited him, and Fester, who noticed everything and resented nothing, was quietly delighted every time she used it. The morning's first true lesson was the blade, and for the blade they went out to the terrace because Gomez insisted on it. Gomez Adams loved 3 things without measure, and his wife and his family were 2 of them, and the third was fencing, which he regarded as a conversation conducted at high speed with a very sharp opinion. He had appointed himself co-instructor the day Harry could lift a foil, and the arrangement with Wednesday was that she taught the mind of the thing and he taught the body, and the 2 of them ran their student between them like a coin between 2 hands. "En garde, my boy," Gomez cried, already lunging, and Harry gave ground as he had been taught, light on the balls of his feet, foil up, watching not the point but the shoulder, because Wednesday said the point lies and the shoulder never does. They ran the length of the terrace and back, Steele whispering, Gomez laughing with the pure animal joy of a man doing the thing he was made for, and Harry answering him beat for beat, small and quick and getting quicker, until on the 3rd pass he did something Wednesday had drilled into him for a month. A disengage under Gomez's blade followed by a step that took him off the line entirely, and the button of his foil touched the center of Gomez's waistcoat and stopped. The terrace went quiet. Gomez looked down at the foil against his chest. He looked up at Harry. His mustache began very slowly to climb. "Tish," he roared toward the house, thunderstruck with pride. "Tish, he touched me, the boy touched me clean. Oh, that was beautiful, Harry, that was a filthy, gorgeous, underhanded touch. Your father would have wept." He seized Harry and lifted him clean off the flagstones and kissed him soundly on both cheeks, foil and all. "Again, do it dirtier." Wednesday, watching from the balustrade with her arms folded, made a note in her book. Aloud she said only, "The footwork was adequate." But Harry had learned to read her the way the family read weather, and and he saw the thing she did with the corner of her mouth, the almost nothing that was, for Wednesday, a standing ovation, and it was worth more to him than Gomez lifting him off the ground, though he would never have said so because saying so would have embarrassed them both, and Adamses did not embarrass the people they loved. The cup came after. The cup was Wednesday's name for the discipline that outsiders, had any outsiders been permitted to watch, would have found the most alarming, and that was in fact the most theatrical thing in the entire curriculum. It was conducted in the still room, among Grandmamma's shelves of jars, under a hand-painted sign that read poisons, which Grandmamma had put up as a joke and which had never once been funny to a plumber. Here is the truth of the cup which the family understood and the world would not have. Nothing on Grandmamma's poison shelf could kill a fly, and most of it was tea. The name is the weapon, Wednesday explained the first time, pouring hot water over a fist of dried leaves into a cup of black stoneware. Watch what happens to a grown man when you hand him a cup and tell him without smiling that it is nightshade. He goes pale, his hands shake. His whole nervous system does your work for you, and you have not spent a single real drop of anything. This is devil's bloom, it is chamomile, it will make you calm and possibly sleepy. I want you to drink it in front of Pugsley and tell him it will stop your heart, and I want you to keep your composure while he screams. Harry drank it. Pugsley screamed. Harry kept his composure and even yawned, and Pugsley had to be shown the tin of chamomile before he would stop, and Grandmamma laughed so hard she had to sit down on the churn. That was the whole of the poison's education, and it was a superb education, though not in poison. It was an education in performance, in the flat delivery of an outrageous claim, in reading the fear on a face and deciding what to do with it. Harry learned to brew 40 kinds of tea and to name each one after a different way of dying and to serve them with a straight face to visitors who left the Adams house convinced they had narrowly survived it, which was exactly the reputation the family enjoyed and exactly the shield it wanted around its youngest. Grandmamma taught the brewing, Wednesday taught the lie. And Harry, who had a gift for both, could by 7 pour out a cup of ordinary peppermint and hand it across a table with such grave, courteous menace that the recipient's hands would shake. And this, Wednesday wrote in her book, is the most useful thing he does. He can make people afraid without ever once being cruel. Remember that this is rare. Protect it. The box was Wednesday's name for escapology, and by the box she meant any enclosure a clever enemy might one day use to hold him, and she owned, by Harry's 7th year, a great many of them. There was the steamer trunk. There was a coffin fitted with a lock that a lesser child would have found upsetting, and that Harry found merely inconvenient. There was a straitjacket Fester had donated from his own past, canvas gone soft with use, which Harry could shrug out of in the time it took Wednesday to recite the family motto. And there was the water tank, which was the examination all the smaller boxes prepared him for, a tall glass cylinder Fester had plumbed into the ballroom and filled with water the exact grave cold of the well. Panic uses air, Wednesday said, standing beside the tank with her stopwatch while Lurch lowered Harry in, wrists cuffed, upside down, the water closing over him green and silent. Every thrash costs you a breath you will want back in 40 seconds. The trick is not to be brave. Brave people drown. The trick is to be bored. You are not in danger. You are doing a task with your hands in poor light, and you have all the time your lungs will give you, which is more than you think if you spend it well. Harry hung in the cold and did not thrash. He let himself be bored. He found the first cuff by feel, the way Thing had taught him, and worked the shim he had palmed from his sleeve into the mechanism, unhurried, while the world above the water wobbled and Wednesday's clock ticked somewhere beyond the glass. 1 cuff. He did not celebrate. Celebrating cost air. The second cuff was stiffer, and he felt the old animal want to come up and scrabble, and he let it come and looked at it the way Wednesday had taught him to look at the heat in the market without heat, and he set it aside, and the shim turned and the cuff opened, and he rose slow through the cold and broke the surface without gasping, which was the whole of the examination. Wednesday clicked the stopwatch. She looked at it. She looked at him, streaming, treading water in the tank, 7 years old and entirely composed, and she wrote a number in her book without a word, and then she did a thing she did perhaps twice a year, which was to reach down and haul him out herself instead of letting Lurch do it, and to wrap the black towel around his shoulders herself, and to say in a voice with nothing in it that a stranger could have named, faster than me. When I was 9, I did that in 1:40. You did it in 1:12. She tucked the towel. You will never be as good as me at the blade. Your reach is wrong and it always will be. But you are already better than me in the box, and you are 7, and I find that I am not even angry about it, which is how I know it is real. You could be a little angry about it, Harry offered, teeth chattering. If it would help. It would not help, said Wednesday. Go and get dry, and Harry. He turned at the ballroom door, dripping. She had already turned back to her book, pen moving, not looking at him, which was how she said the things she could not say to a face. You held your breath better than you hold your composure on the plank. Fear of the water is honest. Fear of falling is vanity, because you have the gift now and the floor will catch you and some part of you knows it. Work on the vanity. That is tomorrow's lesson. Dry off. And Harry went to get dry, warm all through despite the cold water, because he had learned to hear what Wednesday put under the flat surface of her voice, and what she had put there plainly was that she had been afraid for him in the tank, and would rather have died than say so, and had said so anyway in the only language she owned. The voice from the other side was Thursday's. The seance room was round and windowless and hung with the portraits of Adamses who had died interestingly, and in the center stood a table with a single candle, and around the table on Thursdays sat Morticia and Wednesday and Harry, hands linked, calling on the family that had gone before. Whether the family that had gone before actually answered was a question the household did not trouble itself with. What mattered, Morticia taught, was the listening. A seance is not about the dead, Morticia said in the velvet voice that made the candle lean toward her. The dead are busy. A seance is about learning to sit in the dark and pay complete attention to a room, to feel a draft change, to hear a floorboard settle 3 doors away, to know without your eyes exactly who has entered and where they stand and whether they mean you well. The living give themselves away constantly, my darling. We shift, we breathe, we hold ourselves wrong when we are lying. Learn to feel a room the way you feel a seance, and no one will ever again come up behind you. So Harry learned to sit in perfect darkness with his hands linked and his eyes closed and read the room through his skin, and Wednesday tested him by having Pugsley creep in barefoot, and Harry learned to say, without opening his eyes, "You are by the west portrait, Pugsley, and you have brought the crossbow, and if you loose it I will know a full second before you decide to, and I will not be where you aim." He was right often enough that Pugsley stopped trying, which was itself the lesson. The seances did occasionally produce a visitor, which the family regarded the way other families regard a relative dropping in unannounced, with weary courtesy and an eye on the good silver. One Thursday the candle guttered without a draught, the temperature in the round room dropped until Harry could see his own breath, and a voice that came from no particular direction and everywhere at once said peevishly, "Who is holding the little one's hand? He grips like a trap, I approve." "Great-aunt Calpurnia," said Morticia, unsurprised, inclining her head to the empty air. "You're looking translucent, it suits you." "Flattery," said Great-aunt Calpurnia, who had died in 1806 in a manner the family still declined to specify in front of company. "I haven't got long, the veil is thin tonight and I've a seance in Prague after this, they always double-book me in October. Listen, the new one." The cold drew close to Harry, examined him without eyes and hummed, "Old blood, newer than ours and hotter. There are people looking for you, child, up in the cold north, behind a wall you can't see. They lost you and they've been quiet about it, the way clever men are quiet about the things that shame them. They will come, not soon, but they will come, and they will come smiling, and the smiling ones are the ones you watch." The candle steadied. "That's all. Wednesday, you're slouching. Death does not excuse posture. Goodbye." The cold lifted. The candle burned normally. Harry sat with the words settling into him, and Morticia squeezed his hand once and said, "You'll remember that, not with fear, with attention. Fear makes you Gerald, attention makes you ready." And Harry nodded and remembered it and did not for once need Wednesday to write it down. And then there was the day the magic came. It happened during falling, which was the least glamorous discipline and the one Wednesday drilled hardest, because she said, everyone eventually falls, and the whole difference between the quick and the dead is what they do on the way down. She had built a scaffold in the ballroom, a wooden tower of increasing heights with a pile of moldering mattresses at its foot, and Harry spent hours a week throwing himself off it and learning to land soft, to roll, to spread the blow across his whole body, instead of concentrating it in one poor bone. That day the top plank was higher than it had ever been, and the mattress pile looked very far away, and Harry stood on the plank with his toes over the edge and did the thing Wednesday had told him 100 times not to do, which was think about it. He slipped. It was not a jump. It was a graceless, sideways, arms-wheeling slip off the wrong edge, out past the mattresses entirely, toward the bare flagstones, and there was no roll that would save a fall-onto stone from that height. And in the quarter-second of falling, Harry did not scream because Wednesday had trained the scream out of him, and he did not scrabble because Thing had trained the scrabble out of him. And instead, with the whole of his calm and convenient attention, he wanted very much not to hit the floor. And the floor let him go. He stopped a hand's width above the flagstones. Just stopped in the air, spread flat and slow, turning like a leaf held down under still water, his glasses slipping off his nose to clink gently on the stone below him while he himself did not fall at all. He hung there, he breathed, he turned his head and looked with enormous interest at the floor that had declined to have him. Then gently, as though something had finished considering the matter, it set him down. There was a silence in the ballroom of a specific and total kind. Wednesday was the first to move. She crossed the floor, picked up his glasses, cleaned them on her sleeve, and put them back on his face, and she looked at him from a distance of 6 inches with the expression of a scientist who has just watched water run uphill and intends to find out why. "Do that again," she said. "I don't know how I did it the first time," Harry said. "Then we'll find out how. Get back on the plank." "Absolutely not," said Morticia, sweeping into the ballroom in a rush of black, having felt the disturbance 3 rooms away, alert to everything in her house. She went to Harry and turned his face up to hers and looked at him, at the scar and the green eyes and the small, startled person behind them, and whatever she saw settled her at once. "You are not hurt." "No," Harry said. "The floor caught me." "The floor," said Morticia, "did no such thing. You caught you." She touched the scar on his forehead as she had the night of the rain, and something in her face gathered and gentled. "I wondered when this would come. Your first family were of the old blood, my darling, the wand-carrying kind, the kind that man Dumbledore wrote his letter about. It was always going to wake in you, and I am very glad it has waked here, among people who will think it delightful, and not somewhere that would have thought it frightening and tried to knock it out of you." Fester, who had come running at the noise and arrived in time to see the last of it, was beside himself. He floated, Gomez, he floated. Did you see? He did it with his mind. That is the best thing I have ever seen a person do, and I once saw a man swallow a chair. He clutched Harry to his side. "Can you do it to me? Can you float me? Float me right now. I've always wanted to know what the ceiling smells like." "Fester," said Morticia. "Later, then," Fester conceded, radiant. What might have been in another household a source of fear or confusion or shame was, in the Adams house, simply the most exciting thing to happen since the chandelier fell on the vicar. The family did not react to Harry's magic with alarm. They reacted to it the way they reacted to everything unusual and dangerous and marvelous, which was to gather round it, admire it from every angle, and immediately begin working out how to make it part of the act. Wednesday adapted her curriculum by Friday. She added a line to the hand-lettered schedule at the very top, above the blade and the cup and all the rest, and it was a line in a hand slightly less controlled than her usual, which was the closest Wednesday came to writing something down while excited. "The gift," it said, "to be aimed. Every other thing I have taught you," she told him in the salle with the candle and her book and her level black stare, "is a way of making a small person dangerous. This is different. This is a thing you were born already holding, the way you were born already holding my finger. I am not going to teach you what it is. I don't know what it is. That is for the wand people to explain, and one day they will come and try. What I am going to teach you is the only thing that matters until they do." She leaned forward. "Composure. The floor caught you because you were calm on the way down. The instant you panic, this gift will do to you what a foil does to a fool. It will go where your fear points it. So we practice being calm while alarming things happen, which we were doing anyway, and now we do it more." She sat back. "You are going to be very powerful, Harry. I have suspected it since you were 15 months old and unafraid of a severed hand. Powerful people who cannot keep their composure are a menace to everyone, including themselves. Powerful people who can are the most dangerous thing in any room, and no one ever sees them coming because they are also always the calmest. That is what you're going to be. Any questions? Can I have a sword yet? When you can put me on the mat," Wednesday said. "You have never once put me on the mat." "I'm 7. Excuses," said Wednesday, "are just fear wearing a coat. Get up, we fall until dark." The gift came more often after that, the way a spring comes up more freely once it's been found. It was undisciplined at first, and it had, the family noticed, a sense of humor, or perhaps it simply reflected the household it had woken in. When Harry was cross, drawers stuck. When he was pleased, the house's many clocks agreed with each other for an hour, which they otherwise never did. Once when Pugsley cheated at cards, every card in Pugsley's hand turned into a small angry crow and flew up the chimney, and Pugsley was so impressed he lost on purpose for a week, hoping it would happen again. Gomez took it in stride, as Gomez took everything, with brandy and delight. "Magic in the blood," he said, toasting Harry across the dinner table. "Of course there is. Look at him. I have never once doubted this family was touched by something that doesn't answer to the daylight. Your mother, Harry, your true mother, gave up her life to put a shield around you that this Dumbledore fellow thought he was clever to weaponize. That is love, my boy, the real and murderous kind, the kind we understand in this house better than anyone. You carry her shield, and now you carry her craft, where both owe no one an apology for either." Harry, 7 years old, at the foot of a table full of the strangest people in the Western world, understood that he was being told something enormous, and he took hold of it and did not let go, with a grip that surprised people. That night Morticia came to his room, as she did most nights, and sat on the edge of the coffin bed he had long since outgrown the width of and refused to give up, and she smoothed his hair back from the scar. The candle threw her shadow enormous up the wall behind her, and she let it because she liked her shadow. "You went very quiet at dinner," she said, "when your father spoke of your mother, your true mother." "I don't remember her," Harry said. It did not come out sad, because sadness would have been a lie. You cannot miss a face you never held. "I remember the rain a little. I think I remember the rain, and then it's all this, all of you." He looked up at her, at the pale, grave, beautiful face that had leaned over a basket 7 years ago, and decided, "Is it strange that I don't feel like something's missing?" "No," said Morticia. "It is the opposite of strange. It is the whole thing your first mother wanted and could not finish. She spent the last of herself putting a wall around you so that whatever happened, you would go on. She did the hard half, my darling, the half that costs everything. We only had to do the easy half, which is to want you every single day out loud until wanting you became the floor you stand on." She bent and kissed the scar, which no one but Morticia was permitted to do. "You are not missing anything. You are carrying 2 families instead of 1. Some people go their whole lives and are loved by no one properly. You are loved by the dead and the living both, and by a house and by a hand. That is not a lack, Harry. That is an embarrassment of riches, and you will spend your life learning what to do with it. Harry thought about that. Down the corridor, faintly, Fester was singing his shipwreck song to no one, changing the ending. Somewhere below, Cleopatra rustled in her sleep. Thing lay curled on the windowsill, keeping the night watch it had never once abandoned. Mother, Harry said, trying the word which he did not use lightly, because in that house words were spent carefully and meant when they were spent. Yes, my darling. Nothing, Harry said. I just wanted to see if it was true when I said it. And was it? Yes, said Harry. Morticia looked at him a long moment in the candlelight, and then she rose and drew the black coverlet to his chin and went to the door and paused there with her hand on the frame. Sleep badly, she said, which in that house was the tenderest of all good nights, a wish for interesting dreams. We fall at 9. Wednesday has raised the plank again. That autumn the household went to town, which was an event the town did not enjoy and could not prevent. They went in the hearse, all of them, because a trip to town was a family expedition, and the Adamses did nothing important alone. Morticia needed embalming spices from the apothecary, which she used in her cooking. Grandmamma needed to visit a woman who owed her a chicken and a curse. Gomez needed cigars. Fester needed, in his own words, nothing at all, but wanted to come and stand alarmingly near the fireworks shop. And Wednesday had decreed that Harry needed a field examination in being boring, by which one escapes notice, the discipline of moving through a crowd of ordinary people so unremarkably that no one could later say they had seen you. The whole family is memorable, Wednesday told him on the drive-in, with the town's neat rooftops coming up gray and suspicious ahead. That is our shield, and it is also our weakness. Everyone remembers us. No one remembers you if you do this right. You are going to walk from the hearse to the war memorial and back through the market, and I am going to stand in the square and try to keep track of you, and you are going to make it impossible. Slow when others slow. Look where others look. Want nothing visibly. Be a boy going somewhere dull for a reason no one would ever ask about. Go. Harry went. Came back 11 minutes later and stood at Wednesday's elbow, and she started very slightly because she had lost him at the fishmonger's and had been scanning the wrong end of the market for 4 minutes. You saw me at the fish, Harry said, and then I bought a fish. You don't have a fish. I gave it to a cat, Harry said. A boy carrying a fish is invisible. Everyone knows why he's there. You stopped looking at me the second I had a reason to exist. He paused. Thing taught me that one, actually. Hands are invisible too. Everyone's looking at faces. Wednesday regarded him for a long moment, and then she took out her book and wrote in it, and Harry, who had learned to read upside down from Thing, saw that what she wrote was, "He is better at this than I am. Do not let him know I wrote this." He did not let her know. He gave her instead the almost nothing at the corner of his mouth that he had learned from her, and she recognized it, and the two of them stood in the middle of a town that was terrified of their family and shared, invisibly in plain sight, the private joke of being the two most dangerous people in the square and the two nobody would ever suspect. The trouble, when it came from an ordinary quarter, which Wednesday always said the real trouble did. A man in the market had a dancing bear, an old mangy thing on a chain, and he made it dance by methods that turned Harry very quiet. Harry had a great tolerance for things that alarmed ordinary people, and almost none for cruelty, which the family had noted early and prized. He stood at the edge of the little crowd and watched the man jerk the chain and strike the bear across the nose with a stick, and the bear flinched and shuffled and would not meet anyone's eyes, and Harry felt the thing he felt when Pugsley cheated at cards, except much larger and much colder and rising. Wednesday appeared at his shoulder. She had felt it too, alert to any shift in Harry, and she looked from his face to the bear to the man and did the arithmetic in half a second. "Composure," she murmured, very low, only for him. "You feel that heat, that is the gift picking up your anger like a match. If you let it go now in a public square in front of 100 witnesses, you will do something wonderful, and you will do it in front of everyone, and it will follow this family home. That is not how we help the bear. Breathe. Cold, not hot. We are going to help the bear, and no one is going to be able to prove we did anything at all. Do you understand? The angry way is the easy way, and the easy way is Gerald's way. Be better than Gerald. Now quietly, what does the chain need?" Harry breathed. The heat banked down into something colder and more useful, and he looked at the chain, at the cheap padlock that held it to the man's belt, and he thought of Thing's year of dropped teacups and hairpins. The padlock, very quietly, and with no one looking at it, unlocked itself and slid open and dropped into the mud. The bear felt the chain go slack. It looked up. It looked at Harry once, the way Cleopatra the man-eating plant had once looked at him, and then it turned and walked, unhurried, out of the market and into the woods beyond the town, and it was gone before the man had finished his patter. And by the time he noticed the empty chain, there was nothing to see and no one to blame, and a small, unmemorable, dark-haired boy already 3 stalls away, buying a fish, invisible. "Better than hot," Wednesday said on the drive home into the dark of the hearse, not looking at him. "You said the angry way is the easy way," Harry said. "It is, and you didn't take it. And the bear's in the woods, and we are in the car, and nobody in that square will ever be able to say the Adams boy did a single thing. She was quiet the length of a mile. Then she said to the window in the flattest possible voice, so flat that only someone who had spent 7 years learning to read her would have heard what was in it, "That was the best work you have ever done. I am not going to say it again, and if you tell Fester I said it at all, I will put you back in the water tank." Harry looked out his own window at the dark going by, at the town shrinking behind them, at the woods where a bear was learning it was free, and he did not say anything, because there was nothing to say that the silence was not already saying better. Up front, Gomez was singing something in Spanish about a knife, and Morticia was harmonizing, and Grandmama was asleep with her new chicken on her lap, and Fester was holding a sparkler he was not supposed to have lit inside the car, and Thing rode on the seatback between Harry and Wednesday with all 5 fingers spread, keeping watch on the road behind as it always did, as it always would. They got home very late. The house was waiting for them, black against a blacker sky, one gold window lit in the tower. Lurch opened the door before they reached it. And Harry, climbing the steps between his terrifying beloved family, 7 years old and already quietly formidable, and not yet aware how thoroughly the world to the north had lost its chance to shape him, went inside to a supper that no medical authority would have endorsed in the only house that had ever wanted him, to be dangerous and safe and completely, permanently home. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The invitation, regrettably on parchment. The first owl arrived on a Tuesday, tapped politely at the tower window, was eaten by the family eagle, and thereby delayed the wizarding world by nearly a week. The second owl was more cautious. It circled the mansion 3 times, studying the gargoyles, and elected to drop its letter down the chimney, where it landed in the great hall fireplace and would have burned had Harry not put the fire out without touching it, which he could now do without thinking, and which he did while reading over Pugsley's shoulder, barely glancing up. "For you," said Wednesday, who had retrieved the singed envelope with the fire tongs and was examining the address. She was 17 now and had lost none of her flatness and gained a great deal of precision, and she read the address aloud in the tone she reserved for things that had presumed too much. Mr. H. Potter, the second coffin from the left, East Tower Landing, Adams Mansion. She turned the envelope over, green wax, a crest with a lion, a snake, a badger, an eagle. "They know exactly where you sleep, down to the coffin. Interesting." "That's not unsettling at all," Harry said, and took the letter. He was 11 now, and if the family had done its work, and the family had done its work, he was the finished draft of the boy who had floated a hand above the flagstones at 7. He had grown into his own quiet, a stillness the household had shaped and sharpened until it had become the most noticeable thing about him, which was Wednesday's private joke, that they had made him so composed he was conspicuous. He moved through the loud chaos of the mansion like the one fixed point in a storm. He could put a foil button on a fly. He could brew you a cup of chamomile and convince you it was your last. He could sit in a dark room and tell you who had entered by the change in the air, and he could, when he chose, drop out of your attention so completely that you would swear the room was empty. And he could do with the gift a growing catalogue of things the wand people would have needed incantations and years for, because no one had ever told him it was supposed to be hard. He opened the letter with a paper knife shaped like a raven and read it standing at the long table while his family pretended not to watch him and watched him. "Dear Mr. Potter," it began, "we are pleased to inform you that you have a place at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." There was a list of equipment. There was a great deal about robes and cauldrons and the strict prohibition on first years owning broomsticks, which Fester read over Harry's other shoulder and pronounced tyranny. There was a request for a reply by owl no later than the 31st of July, and it was signed in emerald ink by a deputy headmistress named Minerva McGonagall. And clipped behind the standard letter on heavier paper in a thinner and older and far more careful hand was a second note, and this one was not addressed to Harry. It was addressed to whomever presently has the care of the child. Harry read that one twice. Then he handed it without a word to Morticia, because some letters belonged to the head of a family, and Morticia read it in the tall black chair with Gomez at her shoulder, and the great hall went quiet in the particular way it had gone quiet once before on a night of rain 10 years ago. "He knows," said Morticia at last, folding it, "not everything, but he has found the thread at last and followed it here, and he is being very, very careful about how he pulls." She looked up and her voice was velvet over something with an edge. "He asks, most courteously, whether he might call, in person, to discuss the boy's future. He says there are things about Harry that only he can explain and protections that must be renewed, and that he hopes we will understand he acts only out of concern for the child's safety." She set the note on the table. "It is the most beautifully written thing I have ever read. Every sentence is a door held open with one hand and a knife held behind the back with the other. Gomez, I believe I am going to enjoy this man enormously, right up until the moment we go to war with him." Far to the north, in the round office at the top of the tower, Albus Dumbledore had spent 10 years not quite letting himself be afraid. It is worth understanding him because the family that had taken his lost boy understood him, and understood that he was not a monster, which is what made him dangerous. He had not lost Harry Potter through malice. He had lost him through a certainty so complete it had never thought to check its own footing. He had placed the child with the Dursleys because the blood protection of Lily Potter's sacrifice, renewed by proximity to her sister's blood, was the surest shield in the world against the thing that would one day come back for the boy. He had reasoned it out beautifully. He had been right about the magic and wrong about the people, and he had discovered his error the morning after, when a silver instrument keyed to the boy's blood and the Dursley threshold stopped spinning and would not start again. He had gone to Privet Drive himself that first morning, and found a large frightened family who swore, sweating, that no child had ever been left with them, that they had woken to an empty step, that they knew nothing, wanted nothing, and would sign anything if he would only go away. He had read them gently without their knowing, and found in the muddy back of Vernon Dursley's mind the true memory, the wet basket on the step at dusk, the decision to leave it out overnight and deal with it in daylight, the empty step at dawn. And Albus Dumbledore had understood, standing in that pruned and tidy front garden, that he had handed the most important child in Britain to people who had put him outside like a milk bottle, and that someone in the dark had taken him. He had searched quietly, because a public search would have told the boy's enemies that the boy was loose in the world with no protection at all, which was the one fact Dumbledore could not afford anyone to learn, least of all the scattered faithful of a fallen Dark Lord who were even then in Azkaban dreaming of a resurrection. So he searched in whispers through 10 years and found nothing, because the trail led to a house that did not appear on maps that mattered, occupied by a family that no charm he owned could locate, because they were warded by something older and ruder than his charms. They simply did not care to be found, and the world, sensing this, had learned not to look. Only the school's own magic had found the boy in the end, the ancient self-writing quill that inscribed the name of every magical child in Britain at birth and knew, always, precisely where each one slept, because a school must be able to send a letter. The quill did not answer to Dumbledore, it answered to nothing. And when Harry Potter turned 11, it dipped itself and wrote his address in the great book in its own indifferent hand, the second coffin from the left, East Tower Landing, Adam's Mansion, and Minerva McGonagall had brought the book to Dumbledore with her lips very thin, and said, "Albus, I think you had better look at where the Potter boy has been living." He had looked. He had felt for the length of one breath the specific vertigo of a man who has built 10 years of plans on a foundation he cannot see, and then he had mastered it, because that was the thing Albus Dumbledore did best, and he had begun at once to make new plans. The boy was alive, that was the miracle and the terror. The prophecy still stood, the war it foretold was still coming. The thing in the dark that had marked the child would return, and when it did, the child would have to face it, and be, in some sense Dumbledore had never let himself examine too closely, spent in the facing. For that, the boy had to be shaped. He had to trust the right people, love the right cause, walk willingly toward the right sacrifice when the hour came. That shaping was supposed to have taken 11 years in a home so loveless the boy would arrive at Hogwarts starved for exactly the warmth and purpose Dumbledore could provide. Instead, the boy had spent 11 years somewhere else, and Dumbledore did not know what he had become, and a plan built on a person you do not know is not a plan. It is a hope. Albus Dumbledore had not stayed alive and ahead of darker men than himself for a century by trusting to hope. So he wrote the most careful letter of his long, careful life, and he sent Minerva, because Minerva was honest and formidable and would tell him the truth of what she found. And he told himself, arranging his half-moon spectacles, that he went to this family in concern for a child's safety, which was true. And that concern for a child's safety was the whole of it, which was not, and he was old enough and clever enough to know the difference and to choose, one more time, not to look at it directly. Minerva McGonagall arrived at the Adams Mansion on the last day of July, in a traveling cloak of bottle green, and stood at the wrought iron gate for a moment composing herself, because the house had a way of looming that got worse the longer one regarded it. Lurch opened the gate before she touched it. He looked down at her from his considerable height and made a sound like a mausoleum settling. "Good afternoon," said Professor McGonagall, who had faced down Death Eaters and did not intend to be intimidated by a butler. "Minerva McGonagall, I am expected." "You rang," Lurch confirmed incorrectly and turned, and she followed him up a path lined with black roses and one topiary trimmed into the shape of a gallows, across a threshold that felt, to her practiced senses, older than the ministry and considerably less well disposed, and into a great hall where the entire Adams family had arranged itself to receive her with the courtesy of a firing squad. She was a difficult woman to unsettle, and they unsettled her within 90 seconds, and she respected them for it before the tea was poured. It went like this. Morticia rose to greet her, tall and pale and gracious, and said her house was honored, and Professor McGonagall believed exactly none of it and all of it at once. Gomez kissed her hand and complimented her on her posture, which he said suggested a woman who had killed and slept well after. Grandmamma offered her a scone that moved. A child of perhaps 15, round and grave, showed her a crossbow without comment. And through it all a disembodied hand sat on the arm of the sofa, keeping what she slowly realized was watch, its fingers tracking her whenever she shifted her weight. And Minerva McGonagall, who had taught for 40 years and could silence a hall of teenagers with an eyebrow, understood that she had walked into a room where every single occupant, including the furniture, had assessed exactly how they would deal with her if she proved to be a threat, and had found the assessment restful. Then she saw the boy and she forgot for a moment to be a professional. He was small and dark and green-eyed, with James Potter's untidy hair and Lily Potter's eyes, and yes, the scar, faint now under the fringe. He sat a little apart, composed, watching her with an attention that had nothing of a child's fidget in it. She had come expecting to find one of two things, a spoiled prince or a broken waif, the two shapes a famous orphan usually took. She found neither. She found a boy who looked back at her the way a duelist looks at an unfamiliar opponent across the salle, courteous, unafraid, and already 3 moves ahead, and she thought, with a lurch that she kept off her face, "Oh, Albus. Oh, this is not what you sent me for at all. This one is not going to be shaped by anybody." "Mr. Potter," she said. "Professor," said Harry, and inclined his head with a gravity that would have suited a man of 60. "Thank you for coming yourself. You could have sent the letter and let it argue for you. Coming in person means you wanted to see what we are before you decide what to tell the man who sent you." He let that sit, perfectly pleasant. "I'd have done the same. Would you like the tea? I made it. It's chamomile. It's only chamomile. I mention that because in this house it's polite to say so." Professor McGonagall took the tea and drank it, and it was only chamomile, and it was the most reassuring cup of tea she had ever been afraid of. They talked for 2 hours. She had come prepared to reassure nervous or grasping guardians and found instead a negotiation conducted by people who had clearly rehearsed it, though she never caught them at it. Morticia asked about the curriculum and listened to the answers with the courteous attention of a woman deciding whether a school was good enough for her son. Gomez asked with tremendous warmth about the school's fencing and was distraught to learn there was none, and offered on the spot to endow a program. Wednesday asked 3 questions in a row, each flatter than the last, about the exact nature of the protections Dumbledore proposed to renew, about who would have access to the boy, and about what, precisely, the headmaster believed was coming for him. And Professor McGonagall found herself answering more honestly than she had intended, because there is a quality of question that makes a lie feel like a small and shabby thing to attempt. "I will tell you what I know, which is less than Albus knows," she said at last, setting down her cup, and she said it to Wednesday, because Wednesday was plainly the one keeping the ledger. "There was a wizard who called himself Lord Voldemort. He killed Harry's parents. He tried to kill Harry and could not, and was destroyed, or nearly. Most of us believe him gone. Albus Dumbledore does not, and Albus is very rarely wrong, and he believes that one day this creature will return, and that when it does it will come for this boy above all others, because of what passed between them the night of the scar. Albus placed Harry with his mother's relatives because his mother's death laid a protection on him that lives in her blood, and that protection is real, and it is the reason he has offered to renew what he can." She looked around the room at the pale, composed faces. "It is why the headmaster is anxious. He built a great deal on the boy being where he left him, and the boy was not where he left him, and he does not know what you have made instead. I will be candid. Neither do I, but I have taught a very long time, and I know a child who has been loved when I see one, and this one has been loved past the point of anyone bending him. Whatever else Albus hoped, he will not get a boy he can move like a piece. I think you should all be aware that he is going to try." There was a silence. "Thank you," said Morticia, and meant it entirely. "That was honest, and it cost you something, and we do not forget either." She rose, and the audience was ended, and the terms were plain. "Harry will attend your school. He wishes to, and we do not keep our children from things they wish to do. We only make certain they are the most dangerous thing in any room they enter, and then we let them go. But understand this, Professor, and carry it back to your headmaster in whatever words you find kindest." Her voice did not rise. It did the opposite, and the temperature of the room went with it. "We know what he did. We know a child was left in the rain on his instruction, and we know he has spent 10 years keeping that quiet, not to protect the boy, but to protect himself. We are not sending you a lamb to be prepared for some altar of his choosing. We are sending you an Adams who happens also to be a Potter, and who has been raised by people who buried the last man that tried to arrange one of our children in the garden, where he is thriving as a rhododendron. If your headmaster wishes to be Harry's teacher, we will be grateful. If he wishes to be his shepherd, he will find the boy is not a sheep, and the family is not a flock, and the crook he brings will be taken from him and put to use he did not intend. Do give him our warmest regards." Professor McGonagall, going home that evening, wrote nothing down until she was well clear of the house, and then she sat on a stile in the dusk and wrote a long letter to Albus Dumbledore and tore it up and wrote a shorter one which said only, "The boy is well. He is more than well. Whatever you were planning, plan something else. And Albus, before you next tell me a thing is done for a child's safety, I should like you to look me in the eye while you say it. I find I have lost the habit of not asking." Dumbledore read Minerva's short letter 3 times, alone, by the light of the instruments that had once watched a boy and now watched nothing, and when he had finished he set it down and did not, for a while, do anything at all, which was rare for him. He admitted to himself in the privacy where he admitted things, a hungry boy, not cruelly. He took no pleasure in the thought of a child gone without love. But a boy who had grown up wanting would have arrived at Hogwarts ready to be filled, and Dumbledore had a great deal to pour, and a purpose that needed a vessel shaped a particular way. A boy loved past bending was a boy who would ask questions and weigh answers and decline the ones that did not serve him, and choose his own road, and the road Dumbledore needed him to walk was not one a free boy would choose if he understood where it ended. "Look me in the eye while you say it," Minerva had written, and Dumbledore, who had looked worse things in the eye than an honest colleague, found he did not want to. He told himself the boy could still be reached. Everyone could be reached. It was only a question of finding the lever, and every person alive had a lever, a fear or a love or a wound, and Dumbledore had spent a long life learning to read them. He would find the boys. He would be patient and kind and genuinely, truly fond, because the boy would be easy to be fond of, and Dumbledore's fondness would be real, which was what made it useful. He would offer the boy the one thing a strange family in a black house could not, which was the truth about who he was and what he was for. And the boy would take it in the end because everyone wants to matter, and Dumbledore could make him matter more than anyone in history. It was a good plan. It had only one flaw, which was that it had been designed for a child who did not exist, and Dumbledore would not learn that for some months, and it would cost him. Diagon Alley met the Addams family on the 9th of August and did not fully recover. They came in force because an outfitting was an expedition, and the Addamses did nothing important alone. They came up out of a fireplace in the leaky cauldron one after another in a rolling bowl of black, and the pub, which had seen a great deal, fell silent over its pints. Morticia dusted soot from Harry's shoulders. Gomez tipped the barman a coin that was the wrong century and beautiful. Fester emerged last, backward and delighted, having ridden the Floo the wrong way on purpose to see what would happen, and pronounced it the finest transportation he had ever survived. The pub found its voice slowly, and then in a rush, because word travels, and the word was that the Potter boy was standing in the leaky cauldron in the flesh. They came at him in ones and twos, a trembling man who wrung his hand, a witch who curtsied and wept a little, a pale fellow in a purple turban who stammered and would not quite meet his eyes, and whose handshake was cold, and whose forehead, under the turban, seemed to trouble him. Harry received them all with the grave courtesy of the house that had made him, thanking each by name where he could catch it, giving nothing, promising nothing, being in the middle of his own legend, entirely unavailable to it. "They think they know you," Morticia murmured, drawing him gently on toward the back of the pub once the crush had thinned. "They have loved a story about you for 10 years. It is not your fault, and it is not your debt. Be kind to them, my darling, and be no one's. The moment you believe their story about you is the moment you stop writing your own." She paused by the archway of brick that would open onto the alley. "That man in the turban, you felt it too." "Cold," Harry said. "Wrong, frightened of me and something else worse than me, both at once." He looked back once at the crowd, at the purple turban already ducking out the door. "I'll remember him." "Do," said Morticia, and tapped the bricks, which rearranged themselves into a doorway onto the strangest street Harry had ever loved on sight. Gringotts loved them. This surprised Harry, who had been braced for the bank to be difficult, and did not surprise Wednesday, who had explained on the way that goblins and Addamses had understood one another for 300 years, being two peoples who took death, gold, and grudges with the seriousness they deserved. The goblin at the high counter looked down at the family's card of introduction, looked up at Gomez, and did something goblins were reputed never to do, which was smile, all of it, every tooth. "Adams," the goblin said with relish. "We wondered when the English branch would come. Your cousins in the Carpathians keep a vault with us, vault of the drowned dowry, cursed to the brim, a pleasure to hold." He turned his black eyes on Harry, and they sharpened. "And this is the Potter boy. We have kept his vault 10 years, sir, against exactly this day, and paid out to no one, though a certain party inquired more than once whether the school fees might be drawn down early for the child's benefit." The goblin's smile widened by a tooth. "We declined. Goblins do not release another's gold to a man's good intentions. Only to the owner or the owner's blood. Will you see your vault, Mr. Potter? It is considerable. Your father's people were not poor, and the dead spend very little." "I would," said Harry. "Thank you." And the party who inquired, was it a very old man with a very long beard? "We do not say who inquires," said the goblin, which was itself the answer, and the two of them, boy and goblin, regarded each other with the mutual approval of people who have just confirmed something unpleasant and are pleased to have company in knowing it. They went down to the vault in a cart that ran on rails into the roots of the earth, and the goblin drove it the way Fester drove the hearse, which is to say for pleasure, plunging through the dark past waterfalls and the distant reek of something enormous and drowsing. Gomez laughed the entire way down. Grandmamma demanded they go faster. Fester tried to stand up in the cart to feel the wind and was hauled back into his seat by Thing, which had ridden along inside Gomez's breast pocket and now clung to the cart's edge with all 5 fingers, scandalized. The Potter vault was deep and old, and when the goblin swung the great door open, a smell came out of it that Harry would remember his whole life. Cold stone and older gold, and underneath, very faint, something floral, as though a woman had stood in this room once, long ago, and the room had kept a little of her against exactly this hour. There was a great deal of gold. Harry looked at it without greed, because Wednesday had trained the greed out of him along with the Scrabble and the Scream, and he understood the gold for what it was, not a fortune but a message, the last thing his first parents had been able to leave him, saved and warded and untouched across 10 years by goblins who would sooner have died than hand it to a man's good intentions. "Take what you need for the school and a little over," Morticia said quietly at his shoulder in the cold of the vault. "And leave the rest, not because you must, because a boy who empties the last room his mother built for him has closed a door he may want open later. Take a handful. Let the room go on being hers a while longer." Harry took a handful and a little over, and at the back of the vault, on a shelf by itself, he found a small photograph in a tarnished frame, two people laughing, a man with untidy hair and a woman with green eyes, moving, waving, alive in the way wizarding photographs are alive, and he stood with it a long moment in the cold, and then he wrapped it in his handkerchief and put it in his breast pocket next to where Thing usually rode, and said nothing, and Morticia said nothing, and the goblin, who had seen a great many people in a great many vaults, looked politely at the ceiling until the boy was ready to go up into the light. Ollivander's was the strangest half-hour of the day, and Harry had grown up in a house with a séance room, so this was a considerable claim. The shop was narrow and dusty and stacked to its ceiling with 10,000 slim boxes, and Mr. Ollivander drifted out from between them, pale and wide-eyed, moving without seeming to walk, and he looked at Harry with a hunger that had nothing to do with money. "Harry Potter," he breathed, "I have wondered for 10 years whether I would ever fit you. Hold out your wand arm." He measured Harry with a tape that measured on its own, and he talked while it did, in the sighing voice of a man who loved his trade past sense. He remembered every wand he had ever sold. He remembered Lily Potter's 10 1/4 inches, willow, swishy, and good for charms. He remembered James Potter's mahogany, pliable, 11 inches. And he remembered, and here his pale eyes flicked to the scar and away, the wand that had made that scar 13 1/2 inches, and he said in a hush that he thought it not improper to say that he had sold it, and that he had expected great things of it, terrible, yes, but great. Then he brought the boxes. Harry tried wand after wand. Ollivander would place one in his hand and snatch it back before he had well gripped it, muttering, "Mahogany, no. Maple, no." A springy one of ebony that turned the lamplight the color of a bruise and was, Ollivander said, close but proud, and Harry did not need a proud wand. Harry was already the proudest thing in the room and hid it, and that took a different partner. Isle of tried and rejected wands grew on the chair, and Ollivander grew happier the harder it became, murmuring that the difficult customers were the only interesting ones, until at last he went very still in the middle of an aisle and stood a moment with his head tilted, listening to something, and then went back into the deepest shadow of the shop and returned with a box gone gray with dust. "I wonder," he said softly. "Yes, I wonder, holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple." "Curious, very curious." He opened the box. "Go on." Harry took the wand, and it was the first one Ollivander had let him actually hold, and the moment his fingers closed on it a warmth ran up his arm and out to the ends of him, and the dusty shop filled with a light the color of the first hour of morning, and every unlit lamp came up at once, and a wind that came from nowhere lifted the rejected wands off the chair and set them down again in a neat fan, and Harry stood in the middle of it holding a thing that had unmistakably chosen him and understood at last in his body what his family had been telling him for 10 years about the difference between what you carry and what carries you. "Curious," Ollivander said again, and there was something in his voice now that was almost fear and almost reverence. "It is curious, Mr. Potter, that you should be destined for this wand when its brother gave you that scar. 13 1/2 inches, you. The phoenix whose tail feather is in your wand gave one other feather, only one other, and it went into the wand that killed your parents and marked your brow." He wrapped the wand in paper with hands that were not quite steady. "The wand chooses the wizard. We must expect great things from you. He who marked you did great things, terrible, yes, but great. So did the people who raised me," Harry said, taking his wand, "and they never once did anything terrible to me. I think that will make the difference in what I do with it." He paid and thanked Mr. Ollivander with the grave courtesy of the house that had made him and turned to go, and at the door he paused, because Wednesday had taught him to pause at doors and feel the room behind him, and he felt Ollivander watching him out into the light with an expression the old man did not know he was wearing, and Harry catalogued it without heat and carried it home, and told Wednesday, who wrote in her book. He is afraid of what Harry might become. Note the ones who are afraid. They are the ones who will act first and act badly and need watching. Madame Malkin's fitted him for robes, and it was there that Harry got his first sight of the wizarding world's opinion of itself, in the shape of a pale, pointed boy already up on the second stool, being pinned into black by a witch on her knees. "Hogwarts, too," the pale boy said, in a voice that had been taught to expect an answer. He looked Harry over, the plain black clothes, the composure, the absence of any adult fussing, and misread all of it, as people would misread Harry for years. My father's buying my books next door. Then I'm going to look at racing brooms. I don't see why first years can't have their own. I think I'll bully father into getting me one and smuggle it in somehow. He waited for admiration. Harry regarded him with the mild, complete attention he gave to man-eating plants and dancing bears. You don't say much. What's your surname? My father says all the good families went to Hogwarts. You have to know who to make friends with early. Some of the wrong sort get in, you know. You wouldn't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. No, Harry agreed pleasantly. You wouldn't. He let the pale boy hear it two ways and choose the wrong one, which the pale boy did, brightening, and Harry decided he had learned everything this person had to teach him, which was a full and useful lesson in exactly the sort of story the North would try to sort him into. My family raised me not to make friends with the wrong sort. So far you're the only person I've met here, and I'm told you can always tell the wrong sort because they tell you who the wrong sort is before they've asked you a single thing about yourself. He smiled, courteous, grave, and the pale boy's mouth opened and did not immediately find anything to put in itself. It was educational meeting you. I hope we're not in the same house, for your sake. Draco Malfoy, who did not yet know his own name, had already been catalogued along with Ollivander's fear, and the goblin's smile and every other thing Harry gathered that day. Watch the small dark boy step down off the stool, thank the seamstress by name, and walk out into Diagon Alley with a family that had assembled at the window. A hand riding one shoulder and a woman in black laying a light-proving touch on the other, and Draco felt, for reasons he could not have explained and would spend years failing to, that he had just lost a contest he had been certain he was winning. Gomez, on the walk to the bookshop, put a hand on Harry's head. The pointed boy, he said, you did not lose your composure. He wasn't a threat, Harry said. He was a mirror. He shows you exactly what he's afraid of by telling you to be afraid of it. Wednesday says the ones like that are useful. You just have to let them keep talking. Her sister, said Gomez, misting slightly, is going to run a small country someday, and I hope I live to see which one. He steered them into Flourish and Blots, where Grandmama was already arguing with a shelf, and Harry bought his books, and one that was not on the list, a black volume on the history of wandless magic that the shopkeeper said no 11-year-old had ever wanted, and Harry paid for it and did not explain, because explaining was a habit the family had never given him. They came home laden, and the family ate a supper no medical authority would have endorsed, and Harry laid out his purchases along the length of the great table for inspection, and each member of the family examined his acquisitions with the seriousness they deserved. Fester tested the cauldron for structural integrity by dropping it down the stairwell and pronounced it sound. Grandmama read his potion's text and found it timid. Gomez wept over the absence of a fencing requirement and vowed to write the school a letter. Pugsley coveted the dragonhide gloves. Morticia unrolled the black school robes, held them up against Harry in the candlelight, and adjusted the fall of them at his shoulders with 2 fingers until they hung like something he had been born wearing. And Wednesday took him aside into the salle one last time on the eve of the day he would leave, and she did not raise the plank and she did not fill the tank. She sat him down across the candle from her, the way they had sat 1,000 times, and she opened her book to the last page she had written, and she closed it again without reading it to him, and she looked at him for a long time in the flat measuring way she reserved, he had known for 10 years, for the thing she loved most in the poisoned world. You are ready, she said. I would keep you here another 10 years if I could, and drill you until you were perfect, and you would still not be perfect because no one is, and at some point a teacher has to let the blade leave her hand and go do the thing it was made for. That point is tomorrow. She folded her hands, so. Last lessons, and then I am done, and you are on your own among people who will underestimate you, which is the most dangerous position they could possibly put themselves in, and they do not know it yet, and I do not intend to warn them. Harry waited. Wednesday did not hurry because Wednesday never hurried the things that mattered. They will try to sort you into a story, she said. The famous orphan, the chosen boy, the lightning scar do not accept the story. Stories are the box you cannot pick the lock of because you don't know you're in one. Be boring where they want you interesting, and interesting where they want you boring, and never once let them tell you who you are. Keep your composure. Everyone there will be Gerald about something, and you will not, and that alone will make you the most powerful person in most rooms. She leaned forward, and her voice went for one sentence out of the flat register and into the cold one, the register she used for real threats. And when the smiling old man comes to be your friend, and he will come on the very first night, I should think, remember Great Aunt Calpurnia. Watch the smiling ones. He left you in the rain, Harry, and then he spent 10 years being sad about it in private, and a man who is sad in private about a thing he did is a man who will do it again if the reasons come back. Do not hate him. Hate is hot, and hot is Gerald. Just never, ever believe him when he tells you a thing is for your own good. Believe your family. We told you the truth before you had words, and we have never once stopped. She sat back, the candle steadied. That's all. That's everything I know. Go and be dangerous and come home for Christmas, and if anyone up there makes you unhappy, write it in a letter and Thing will bring it to me, and I will take the train north and deal with them personally, and no one will ever be able to prove I was there." Harry looked at his sister, his tutor, the girl who had reached back for him from a coffin when he was 15 months old and had not once in 10 years let go, and he did the thing he had learned from her, the almost nothing at the corner of the mouth that in their private grammar meant everything a whole speech would have cheapened. Wednesday returned it. Then she stood and blew out the candle and said into the sudden dark in the flattest voice she owned, "Don't drown at that school. It would be embarrassing for both of us." And she went out, and Harry sat a moment in the dark cell where he had been made, feeling the room as she had taught him, and finding it, for the first and last time, empty of her. And then he rose and went up to the second coffin from the left to sleep his last night in the only house that had ever wanted him, before the train and the castle and the smiling old man, and everything his family had spent 10 years making certain he would be ready for. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Hogwarts, regrettably Platform 9 3/4 had never been quiet in living memory, and the Addams family silenced it in under a minute simply by arriving. They came through the barrier one after another out of the solid brick, unhurried, a rolling tide of black in a sea of tartan and tearful mothers, and the platform's ordinary din of last goodbyes faltered and hushed and reassembled itself into the specific held breath of a crowd deciding whether to be afraid. Gomez wore a black traveling cloak and a smile of terrible good cheer. Morticia moved through the steam like the steam's more elegant cousin. Grandmama had brought a picnic hamper that occasionally shifted its own weight. Fester had brought nothing and wore a coat that smoked faintly at the hem and beamed at every child he passed, several of whom beamed back because children have better instincts than their parents. And Wednesday walked at Harry's side in unbroken black, carrying his trunk as though it weighed nothing, which for Wednesday it did. They deposited Harry, his trunk, his cauldron, and his owl at the door of the Scarlet Engine with the efficiency of people who had planned an extraction and were running it in reverse. There was very little fuss because the Addamses did not fuss, they simply arranged the world and then let it happen. "You have your wand," said Morticia, straightening the fall of his robes one last time. "I have my wand. You have the tin of chamomile and the second tin, which is also chamomile, but which you will tell people is not. I have both tins. You have the picture," said Morticia more quietly, touching the breast of his coat where the frame rode, and Harry nodded, and she was satisfied. Gomez gripped him by both shoulders, held him at arm's length, and regarded him the way a man regards a duel he is proud to have trained. "Remember the terrace, my boy. Watch the shoulder, not the point. Give ground when you must and take it back double. And if any professor at that school lays an unjust hand upon you, you write to me, and I will come north, and we will discuss the matter as gentlemen with sabers at dawn." He kissed both of Harry's cheeks. "We are so proud of you it is nearly unbearable. Go and be terrifying." Fester crushed him in a hug that smelled of ozone and slipped something small and heavy into his pocket, which turned out later to be a light bulb in case, the accompanying note read, "You ever need to prove you are the strangest one in the room." Grandmama pressed the moving hamper on him and told him to trust no one who ate salad. And Thing rode up his sleeve and out onto his collar and gripped his ear once firmly, which in their private grammar meant I would come with you if the school allowed hands, and it does not, and I have read the rules twice looking for a way, and Harry gripped it back, and Thing withdrew down into the family's care, and that was the hardest goodbye, and neither of them made a sound about it. Wednesday went last. She set down the trunk. She looked at him across the small distance she permitted, and she did not repeat any of the 10 years of lessons, because a teacher who repeats herself at the last does not trust her work, and Wednesday trusted her work. "Right," she said, "not because I'll worry, I don't worry, right, because I want the intelligence." She almost turned away and did not. "You were the only interesting thing that ever happened to this family. Don't make it boring by dying. It would ruin the whole story, and I have kept excellent notes." She held out her hand formally, which she had never once done, and Harry took it, and she gripped, testing one professional last time, and found his grip better than her own, and let it go, satisfied at last with the thing she had made. The whistle blew. Harry boarded. The Scarlet Engine pulled him north through a country going gold with autumn, and he sat by the window with the moving hamper on his knee and did not wave, because the Addamses did not wave, they watched, and he watched his family stand on the emptying platform in their unbroken black until the curve of the track took them. And then he turned to the compartment and the strangers in it and began, without hurry, the work of being an Addams among people who had never met one. The first stranger arrived within the hour, a tall red-headed boy with a smudge on his nose who slid the door open, saw the moving hamper, saw the boy sitting with a stillness no 11-year-old should own, and hesitated on the threshold. "Everywhere else is full," the red-headed boy said. "Do you mind?" "Sit down," said Harry. "There's a hamper, it moves. Don't put your hand in it until it's finished with whatever it's doing." The red-headed boy sat, watched the hamper resettle itself, and decided with the resilience of a boy who had grown up in a house that was itself fairly strange, that this was interesting rather than alarming. "Ron Weasley," he said. "Harry, Harry, Ron started to echo the surname, and his eyes went to the fringe over the forehead, and Harry watched him see the scar, and watched him have the thought, and watched him, to his considerable credit, decide not to say it. Ron closed his mouth on the famous name, went a little red, and said instead, "Is that a real owl or one of those enchanted ones? Ours is ancient, Errol, he crashes into things." And Harry, who had been braced all his life for people to want the story and not the person, felt something settle and decided that he liked Ron Weasley, and that liking a person for declining to mention the most interesting thing about you was as good a basis for a friendship as any and better than most. They talked. Ron came from a large, loud, poor, loving family, and Harry came from a small, loud, rich, loving family, and the two of them recognized each other across the difference, because a boy who has been loved in a full house knows another one on sight. Ron explained Quidditch with his whole body. Harry explained fencing and the hamper, and when Ron asked in a lowered voice whether it was true he'd been raised by someone strange, Harry told him the truth, flat and complete, about Fester and the bog and Wednesday and the water tank and the man-eating plant named Cleopatra, and waited for the recoil. Ron did not recoil. Ron said, "That is the best thing I have ever heard in my life," and meant it, and asked if the plant had a favorite food, and their friendship was from that moment permanent. The trolley came. Harry, who had a vault and no experience of not having one, bought the entire cart and shared it out, and Ron, whose family had never once been able to buy the entire cart, understood that this was not showing off but something closer to hospitality, the Adams instinct to feed everyone at the table, and accepted a chocolate frog in the spirit it was given. The second stranger arrived looking for a toad and stayed to interrogate them. She was a girl with a great deal of brown hair and a great deal of certainty, and she had already on the first day read the whole first-year curriculum and formed opinions. "Has anyone seen a toad?" A boy named Neville's lost one. She looked at their sweet-strewn compartment with visible disapproval and at their wands with visible longing. "I've tried a few simple spells myself and they've all worked. Are you doing magic? Let's see it then. What have you tried?" Harry asked with a real and sudden interest that made her blink, because most people met Hermione Granger's competence with a flinch, and here was a boy meeting it with a question. "Turning things different colors mostly, and I fixed a boy's glasses on the platform, though the enchantment won't hold past a week without a fixing charm properly rooted. I looked it up." She said it in a rush, braced for mockery. "Rooted in the bridge of the frame, not the lens," Harry said. "The lens is glass, it won't hold a charm, it's got no grain. The frame's got structure. Anything with structure holds an intention longer. My grandmother taught me that, only she was talking about teacups." He held out his hand. "Harry, this is Ron, sit down. You clearly know more theory than either of us, and I know a few things about doing it without a wand that aren't in any book you've read, and I think we could teach each other, if you can stand to be seen with people eating sweets." Hermione Granger sat down. She would say, years later, that it was the first time anyone at that school had treated her formidable brain as a gift rather than a symptom, and that she had decided in that compartment, over the ruins of a chocolate frog, that whatever house this strange calm boy went to, she was going to be his friend across the whole width of the castle if she had to, and she did have to, and she was. The pale, pointed boy came last, flanked by two larger boys shaped like the furniture. Draco Malfoy had heard along the length of the train that Harry Potter was aboard, and had come to correct the error of their first meeting, and he stood in the compartment doorway and made his offer with his hand out, the offer of the right friends and the right sort, and he made it this time to the famous name rather than the plain boy, and that was his second mistake. "I met you at Madame Malkin's," Harry said, not taking the hand. "You told me how to tell the wrong sort. You were very informative. I've been watching for them ever since." He let the pause do its work. "I don't think we want the same things, Malfoy. You want to be at the top of a small pile. I was raised by people who own the whole graveyard. It's very hard to impress me, and you keep trying to do it by telling me who to look down on, and where I come from we don't look down on people. We look down on people's graves later at our leisure when they've earned it." He smiled, courteous, cold. "Give my regards to your father. I hear he's very good at telling people what the wrong sort is, too. It must run in families. Mine runs to composure. Close the door on your way out. You're letting the story in." Draco left. Ron stared. Hermione, who disapproved of rudeness on principle, found herself revising the principle. "Blimey," said Ron, "you didn't even raise your voice." "Raising your voice is what you do when you're not sure you've won," Harry said, and returned to his chocolate frog, and the three of them rode the rest of the way north together, and the friendship that would carry them through everything that was coming was, by the time the castle's lit windows rose out of the dark over the black lake, already load-bearing. The boats crossed the lake under a sky thick with stars, and the castle stood over the water, enormous and gold-windowed and old, and Harry looked up at it with the frank appraising interest he had once turned on a man-eating plant, and found it, on the whole, a house he could respect. It was large, it was dark, it kept secrets, and something in its lower depths was very quietly not right, which he felt through his skin the moment the boats touched shore, the seance sense picking up a wrongness far down and far off, patient and cold. He noted it, he did not chase it. Wednesday had taught him that you do not go looking for the thing in the cellar on your first night in a house. You learn the house first and let the thing in the cellar reveal itself, which it always does. Then they were in the entrance hall, and Professor McGonagall was there in her bottle green, and she found Harry's face in the crowd of first years and gave him a nod that was almost a greeting and entirely a warning, and led them all into the great hall to be sorted. The sorting hat had been on 10,000 heads and had never, in all its long career, met one it could not read within a sentence, and it met Harry Potter's, and it stopped. Harry felt it arrive in his mind, a dry old rummaging presence, and he did not resist it, because Wednesday had taught him that resistance tells an intruder where the valuables are. He simply sat composed on the stool in front of the entire school and let the hat look and kept his breathing even and thought politely at the presence in his head. Good evening, take whatever time you need. Well, said the hat in his ear and nowhere else. Well, well, this is new. It rummaged. Harry let it. It found the water tank and recoiled. It found the seance room and lingered. It found 10 years of a family that had loved him past bending and a girl with a black notebook and a hand that kept watch, and it made a sound that no hat had made in 1,000 years, a sound of genuine professional astonishment. They built you like a fortress, boy. Every wall in you has a wall behind it. I have sorted the cunning and the brave and the brilliant and the loyal, and you are all four and none because you were not grown wild like the others. You were made on purpose by people who knew exactly what they were doing. I could put you anywhere. You would master any house I dropped you in and none of them would hold you, so. The hat's voice sharpened with interest. You choose. It's rare that I offer, but you're rare. Where do you want to go, Harry Adams? Potter, Harry murmured out loud very quietly on the register, Adams underneath. He considered the 4 tables, the 4 colored banners, the whole architecture of the story the school wanted to sort him into. He thought about the man at the high table with the long silver beard who was watching the sorting with an attention that pretended to be mild, and who wanted, Harry knew, a brave golden boy at a red-end gold table, easy to see, easy to reach, easy to love and to move. And Harry thought about Wednesday saying, be boring where they want you interesting. Somewhere he won't expect me, Harry thought, and won't be able to reach me through, and where the people already assume everyone's got an angle so mine won't show, somewhere I can be underestimated. Ambition then and self-possession and a taste for being the quiet danger in a room full of loud ones, said the hat pleased. Oh, you'll do very well there, and you'll horrify exactly the right person. Better be, and then it shouted it to the hall, Slytherin. The green and silver table applauded uncertainly, because they had just been given the most famous boy in Britain and did not yet understand what they had been given. Draco Malfoy, 3 seats down, went the color of old milk. And at the high table, an old man with a long silver beard did not stop smiling and did not clap either, and behind the half-moon spectacles something recalculated, and Harry, walking to the green table with the whole hall watching, found the old man's eyes and held them a moment, courteous, unreadable, and inclined his head the exact degree Morticia had taught him meant I see you seeing me, and let us both pretend we don't, and sat down among the snakes and was, within the week, without ever once raising his voice, the most important person at the table. The feast was enormous and the ghosts were a delight. Harry, who had grown up in a seance room, treated the Hogwarts dead with a fluent courtesy that startled them, addressing the bloody Baron of Slytherin by his title and asking gravely how he had come by the silver blood on his robes, and the Baron, who had spent 5 centuries being avoided, found himself telling this small living boy the whole terrible story, and adopting him on the spot so that Harry acquired, on his first night, the protection of the one ghost the entire castle feared, which even Wednesday, when she read it in his first letter, conceded was efficient. Then Albus Dumbledore rose to speak, and the hall hushed, and he welcomed them all and made a small charming joke, and then near the end mentioned lightly that the 3rd-floor corridor on the right-hand side was out of bounds to everyone who did not wish to die a very painful death, and sat down to laughter, and Harry did not laugh. Because a headmaster who tells 800 children not to go somewhere on pain of death on the first night of term has just guaranteed that the interesting thing in the castle is on the 3rd floor on the right, and has done it, Harry thought, watching the old man's mild bright eyes sweep the hall and pause for the briefest instant on him, almost as though he wanted a particular boy to be curious. Harry took in the whole performance without expression and thought in Wednesday's flat cadence, the smiling ones. He is already fishing, and I am not a fish. The Slytherin common room was a long, low room under the lake, lit green through windows that looked out into the black water where pale things drifted, and Harry stood in the doorway his first night and felt several dozen ambitious children decide, in a body, what to make of the famous boy the hat had put among them, and he let them decide, and offered them nothing to decide with, which was itself a kind of decision. They tested him gently the way a house of small predators tests a new one. A older boy with a prefect's badge welcomed him with a warmth calibrated to the boy's usefulness and asked, sweetly, whether it was true Harry Potter had been raised by circus folk. A hard-faced girl remarked to the room that some people got sorted here for their name and not their nature. Draco Malfoy, restored to some of his color, held court by the fire, and said something clever and cruel about people who did not know their own blood, loudly enough to carry. Harry crossed the room unhurried and sat down in the best chair by the fire, which was Draco's chair, and which Harry took by the simple expedient of being already in it before anyone had thought to stop him, and he looked into the greenlit water a moment, and then he spoke, not loudly so that the room had to quiet to hear him, which it did. "I was raised," Harry said, "by a family that keeps a man-eating plant, a seance room, and a garden of people who annoyed them. My uncle fishes with dynamite. My sister taught me to escape a locked tank underwater before I was 7. I can make you a cup of tea that will keep you up 3 nights wondering what was in it, and it will have been chamomile, and you will never be sure." He let that settle into the green quiet. "I mention all this so we can skip the part where you find out slowly. I don't want your fear and I don't want your worship. I want to be left alone to learn, and I'm very easy to leave alone because I never start anything." He looked once mildly at Draco. "I only ever finish. Now, whose chair is this? I'll be wanting it most evenings." No one claimed the chair. It was, the prefect would say later, the strangest coup he had ever watched, because nothing happened, and yet by the end of the first night the room had reorganized itself quietly around the small dark boy in the good chair, and Draco Malfoy sat 2 seats down, furious and fascinated, and Slytherin House had acquired, without a single raised voice, a center of gravity it had not had that morning. The first week of classes taught Harry that the wand people had made everything harder than it needed to be, and taught his professors that the Potter boy was going to be a problem of an entirely novel kind. Transfiguration came first. Professor McGonagall set them to turning a match into a needle, and while the rest of the class prodded and muttered, Harry looked at the match and thought, with the flat total attention Wednesday had drilled into him across 10 years of falling and floating, precisely what he wanted the match to be, and it was a needle before he had quite finished thinking it, silver and sharp on the desk in front of him. McGonagall came and stood over it. She picked it up. She looked at Harry, and Harry looked back, courteous and unreadable. "You did that without moving your lips, Mr. Potter," she said quietly so the class would not hear. "I was raised to keep my composure while doing difficult things, Professor," Harry said. "It turns out the wand mostly helps you concentrate. I've been concentrating my whole life. My sister used to drop teacups at me for a year." McGonagall regarded him a moment longer and awarded Slytherin 5 points, and went back to the front of the room and wrote a short private note to herself that evening which said only, "Albus, he does it wandless and silent at 11. Whatever is coming, it will not find him unarmed. I am not certain whether this comforts me." Charms delighted him because Professor Flitwick was small and squeaky and genuinely kind, and kindness Harry knew how to answer. Herbology delighted him more because the greenhouses were full of dangerous plants, and Harry introduced himself to each of them with the grave courtesy Wednesday had taught him at Cleopatra's Jaws, and Professor Sprout found, to her astonishment, that the boy could handle a snapping venomous tentacula with his bare hands and it would gentle for him, and she stopped trying to explain it and simply put him in charge of the worst plants, which suited everyone. Flying was the day his training showed plainest. Madam Hooch had them mount their brooms, and a nervous boy named Neville lost control of his and went up and off and fell 20 feet straight down, and the class screamed, and Harry did not, because the scream had been trained out of him, and instead he was moving before Neville had finished falling off his own broom and under the boy in 3 light steps, and he caught him, and rolled with him, spreading the blow across his whole body the way 10,000 falls off a scaffold had taught him. So that Neville came out of a 20-foot drop with nothing worse than a fright, cradled on the grass by a small dark boy who had made catching a falling person look like something a body simply did without asking the mind. Neville Longbottom, who had been dropped and forgotten by a great many people in his short life, looked up at the boy who had caught him, and attached himself to Harry from that moment with the total devotion of the overlooked, and Harry, who came from a family that collected the overlooked, let him. Only potions curdled, and it curdled on purpose. Professor Snape swept into the dungeon in a bill of black that Harry frankly admired, and opened the lesson by rounding on Harry with a question designed to humiliate, the powdered root of an asphodel and an infusion of wormwood, and Harry, who had grown up in a still room under a hand-painted sign that read poisons, answered it, and the next one and the one after that, flatly and correctly and without any pleasure in it, and then said into the ringing silence, "My grandmother makes that one. She calls it the draught of living death because it puts you to sleep, not because it kills you. Almost nothing that's called deadly is. That's the first thing she taught me. The name is the weapon." And Severus Snape, who had come into that room intending to break the famous Potter boy as he broke every arrogant child who reminded him of the arrogant men who had tormented his own youth, found himself looking at a boy who was not arrogant at all, who had simply been taught by someone the exact craft Snape had spent his life mastering, and who had answered him without a flicker of the swagger Snape hated, and Snape did not know what to do with that and gave Slytherin no points. And watched the boy for the rest of the year with a wary, grudging, growing attention that was not quite respect and was on its way there. The summons came on the third day by way of a note in emerald ink delivered at breakfast by a school owl. The headmaster would be delighted if Mr. Potter would take tea with him that afternoon. The password, the note added warmly, was sherbet lemon. "He wants you alone," Hermione said, reading it upside down with the fluency she had picked up from Harry in 3 days. "On his ground, before you found your feet, that's a negotiating tactic. That's a grandfather having tea," said Ron. "It's both," said Harry. "That's the trick of him. It's always going to be both." He folded the note. "I'll go. You don't decline a man like this. You let him show you his hand, and you keep yours in your lap." He looked up the length of the hall to the high table, where the old man was buttering toast and laughing at something. Professor Flitwick had said, warm and twinkling and beloved, and Harry felt under his skin the sane sense he could not turn off, the sense that read a room through its drafts and its silences, and it told him what it had told him on the boats, that something in this castle was patient and cold and wrong, and that the warmest man in it was standing nearest to it, and had built his whole warm self, over a very long life, around being trusted by exactly the people he intended to spend. Dumbledore's office was round and cluttered and beautiful, full of whirring silver instruments, one of which Harry noticed sat dead and dusty on a high shelf, its brass gone still, and Harry looked at it a moment too long, and the old man saw him look, and something passed between them that neither named. "Lemon drop," said Albus Dumbledore, and his eyes were kind, and his fondness, when it reached across the desk, was entirely real, which was the whole danger of it. "Sit, Harry, sit. I have wanted to meet you for a very long time, longer, perhaps, than you know." 10 years, Harry agreed pleasantly, sitting, taking no lemon drop. Give or take a night in the rain. The office went very still. The instruments whirred on. Harry watched the old man decide how much to spend, and watched him choose, as clever men do, a partial truth, which is the most expensive kind because it looks free. Dumbledore told him gravely and gently that yes, there had been a great sadness in the arrangements after his parents' death, that mistakes had been made in the chaos of that terrible night, that he had grieved every day for a decade not knowing where the boy had gone, and that he thanked whatever powers were listening that Harry had been safe and, he could see, well loved. He told him a portion of the truth about Voldemort and about the scar and about the danger that might one day return, and he offered himself warmly, sincerely, as a guide through what was coming, a man who had known Harry's parents, who could tell him who he really was. It was masterful. It was mostly true. And it landed on a boy who had been raised from infancy by people who had taught him, before he could speak, that the polite ones are the ones who leave you in the rain, and who had told him the whole truth of that rainy night when he was 7, sitting on his knee in a nursery full of black roses, so that there was not one revelation the old man could offer that Harry had not already been given, years ago, in love, by people with nothing to gain. "Thank you," Harry said when the old man had finished, and he said it with a courtesy so complete it could not be argued with. "I know who I am, sir. I've known since I was small. My mother, my first mother, gave her life to shield me, and my second mother told me so every night until I understood it in my bones. I know about the scar. I know something's coming. My family have been getting me ready for it for 10 years, which is longer than you've had me, and they did it out loud, and they never once left me anywhere in the rain to do it." He rose. "I'll be a very good student. I'll learn everything this school can teach me, and I'm grateful for the chance. But I already have a family, and they already told me who I really am, and they did it without wanting anything back, so I hope you'll forgive me if I keep my own counsel about the rest. It was kind of you to have me to tea." He inclined his head precisely. "The lemon drops are very good. My Uncle Fester would love them. He collects things that are bad for you." And he left, and Albus Dumbledore sat alone in the round office among the whirring instruments and the one dead one, and did not eat a lemon drop, and understood at last and completely what Minerva had tried to tell him on a torn-up page, which was that the lever he had spent a life learning to find in every child alive was, in this one child, simply not there, because the wound he needed to press had been healed before it ever set, by people he had dismissed as strange, in a house he could not find on any map that mattered, and that his plan, his good and terrible plan, had been built for a boy who did not exist, and that the boy who did exist had just walked out of his office having thanked him for the tea and given him absolutely nothing, and would keep giving him nothing warmly for years, and there was not one thing Albus Dumbledore could do about it, except the thing he was very good at, which was wait and watch, and hope the boy's own curiosity would take him down to the 3rd floor after all, where a test had been laid, and a trap, and a truth, and where the whole long game might still be won if the boy could only be made to walk toward it on his own 2 feet. Harry went back down to the dungeons, where the Slytherin common room sat green and cool under the lake, and Hermione and Ron were waiting for him at the boundary where the houses met, because they had refused, on principle, to let a wall between houses be a wall between friends, and Ron said, "Well, what did he want?" And Harry said, "Everything. He wanted everything very kindly, and I gave him nothing very kindly, and we're going to do that dance for a long time." And Hermione said, "The 3rd floor corridor. He mentioned it on purpose, didn't he?" He wants us curious, and Harry said, he wants me curious, and looked back up through the dark castle toward the tower where the old man sat, and then down through the floor toward the cold, patient, wrong thing far below, and he thought about a bear in a market and a family that had taught him the angry way is the easy way, and he said to his two friends in the flat cadence he had inherited from a girl with a black notebook, so we're going to be curious slowly and on our own terms. And we're not going to be where he aims. Come on, I'll make you both a cup of tea, it's only chamomile. He paused, grave, probably. Harry wrote home at the end of his first week, at the greenlit desk in the common room by the light of a candle he had brought from home because the castle's torches were too cheerful. He wrote to Wednesday because Wednesday wanted the intelligence. Dear Wednesday, he wrote, report as requested. The hat couldn't sort me, it let me choose. I chose Slytherin, because it's the house the smiling man least wanted me in, and the house where everyone already assumes everyone has an angle, so mine doesn't show. He was furious in a very warm way. He had me to tea on the third day and offered me the truth about who I really am. I told him I already had it from you and Mother years ago for free. He gave me nothing after that because I'd already taken everything he had to bargain with. You were right, he left me in the rain and then felt bad in private, and a man like that is exactly as dangerous as you said. There's a cold wrong thing in the cellars of this castle, on the third floor, which is not the cellar but might as well be. He told the whole school not to go there on pain of death, which means he wants a particular child to be curious. I am being curious slowly. There is a man in a purple turban who is frightened of me and of something worse than me at the same time. I am watching him. I have two friends. One is loud and loyal and comes from a full loving house. You would find him restful. One is the cleverest person here and treats her cleverness like a weapon, which it is. You would like her, which is the highest thing I can say. And there is a boy I caught out of the air today because falling finally paid off, and he has decided to love me, and I have let him because we collect the overlooked. Tell Fester the lemon drops the smiling man keeps would delight him. Tell Mother the ghosts here are lonely and starved for courtesy, and I have been feeding them some. Tell Gomez there is no fencing, and I am appalled. Tell Thing I feel its absence on my collar every hour and have found nowhere in the rules that forbids a hand, and am working on it. I am keeping my composure. Nobody here has any idea what you made. Love, Harry. The reply came 4 days later, tied to the leg of a raven that had plainly frightened the school owls off the tower, and it was short, and it was in Wednesday's spare exact hand. Harry, intelligence received and logged. Slytherin was correct. Continue being nothing he can spend. The cold wrong thing, do not go alone, do not go angry, do not go until you understand the house. The turban man frightened of two things at once is frightened of a passenger. Watch what he protects, not what he threatens. Feed the ghosts, lonely dead are the best informers. Fester has read your letter 40 times and cried on the lemon drop line and is building you something you must not open indoors. Mother says the ghosts are lucky. Gomez has written the school a 9-page letter about fencing which I have intercepted for everyone's sake. Thing has begun mailing itself small distances to test the postal service, and I have had to stop it twice. We are all exactly as strange as you left us. Keep your breath in the tank and your composure on the plank. Come home for Christmas. Do not die. I would have to explain it to the plant. They were curious slowly for 3 weeks, which was Harry's whole point, and then one night in October the castle handed them the third floor for free, because Peeves the poltergeist was chasing Neville's toad, and the only unlocked route away from a very angry Filch ran through a door that should have been locked and was not. It was the corridor. Harry knew it the moment they were through, the seance sense going tight and cold along his arms, the wrongness he had felt on the boat suddenly close, 1 floor down, breathing. Ron had his back to the door fumbling the handle. Hermione had her wand out. And Harry, who had been raised never to run from the thing in the cellar but to look at it and take its measure, lifted the candle and looked. The thing that filled the corridor was a dog, if a dog could be assembled by a committee that could not agree on how many heads a dog should have and had settled on 3. It was enormous, it was slavering. 6 eyes, mad and yellow, swung toward the light, and 3 throats drew breath to sound the alarm that would bring Filch in questions and the end of being curious on their own terms. Ron made a sound, Hermione went white. And Harry stepped forward in front of his friends unhurried, and did the thing his family had taught him at the jaws of a man-eating plant when he was 15 months old, which was to be unafraid of the honest ones, and a dog with 3 heads is nothing if not honest about what it is. Good evening, Harry said to all 3 heads courteously, and held the candle low so they could see his face and his empty hands. You're magnificent. Someone set you to guard a door, haven't they? You don't want to eat 3 children on a Tuesday. That's not guarding, that's just mess, and someone would have to clean it up, and it wouldn't be the person who chained you here. He crouched slow, making himself small and boring, the way you calm anything that has been made frightening by frightened people. I'm not going through your door. I only wanted to see what you are. There, now I've seen. You're the best kept secret in this castle, and they've hidden you behind a lock a poltergeist can open, which tells me the people who put you here are cleverer about magic than they are about children. Go back to sleep. I'll come and pay my respects properly another time. The 3 heads had stopped growling somewhere in the middle of this. The middle head tilted. And then the enormous dog, to Ron's everlasting disbelief, lay down across the trapdoor it was guarding, all three chins on its vast paws, and regarded Harry with 6 eyes gone almost fond, the way Cleopatra had regarded him, the way the market bear had, the way monstrous honest things had regarded him his whole strange life. Harry rose and backed away, courteous to the last, and got his friends out and shut the door. In the corridor outside, Ron leaned against the wall and breathed. "You talked to it," he said. "You talked to a three-headed dog and it went asleep." "It was standing on a trapdoor," Hermione said, who had noticed, because she noticed everything. "It's guarding something under the floor, something the school is protecting badly enough that a locked door and a monster is the whole plan. Harry, that's what the smiling man wants you curious about. That's the bait." "I know," said Harry, and looked back at the shut door, behind which a monster was sleeping on a secret, and felt far below the cold, patient wrong thing turn over in the dark and settle, aware of him now as he was aware of it. "So we don't take it, not yet, not until we understand the whole house." He led them back toward the stairs, candle high, calm as still water. "But I'll tell you what my family would say. Somebody built a trap and put a child-shaped hole in the middle of it. And the only thing more dangerous than walking into a trap like that is being the thing the trap wasn't built to hold." Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The politics of the living the care package from home arrived in November and required the intervention of 4 professors, the school nurse, and in the end, the bloody Baron. It came by a delivery method Fester had invented himself, which is to say it came down the great hall chimney during breakfast in a crate that was still faintly on fire, and it landed on the Slytherin table and sat there smoking gently among the porridge while 800 students went silent, and Harry, without looking up from his toast, said, "That'll be from my uncle. Nobody touch it. It's addressed to me and it knows my handwriting. It won't open for anyone else, and if you force it, it opens the Fester way, and the Fester way involves the ceiling." He set down his toast and regarded the crate with the fondness a boy reserves for the alarming affection of home. "Good morning, crate." The crate ticked at him companionably. Inside, once Harry had said the word to it that Fester had taught him, which was not a magic word but simply Fester's own name said with the right amount of love, the crate unfolded itself like a flower designed by a bomb maker and presented its contents. There was a jar of Grandmamma's preserves, which moved. There was a scarf Morticia had knitted in a black so deep it seemed to absorb the torchlight, and which Harry put on at once and did not take off for the rest of the winter, and which no draft in that drafty castle could get through, because it had been knitted by someone who wanted him warm. There was a photograph of the whole family arranged on the front steps of the mansion in their funeral best, waving, Fester holding up a sign that read "We miss you" dreadfully in letters he had cut, the note explained, from the obituary section. There was a foil, a real one, slim and beautiful, with a note from Gomez that said the school's failure to teach fencing was a scandal he intended to correct by proxy, and that Harry was to practice the terrace form nightly and touch someone deserving upon the chest at his earliest convenience. And there was a small heavy object wrapped in black cloth that turned out to be the light bulb from the platform, returned with a note in Fester's hand. "In case you forgot you brought one, now you have 2. A man can always use a spare bulb. Love, your uncle who thinks you are the best thing the storm ever left on a doorstep." And at the very bottom of the crate, folded up small and patient in a nest of packing straw, having mailed itself the entire distance from the mansion to the castle by a route that had involved, the postmark suggested, 3 countries and a brief and unexplained stay in a customs office in Belgium, was thing. It uncurled, it stretched each finger in turn. It looked around the great hall of Hogwarts, taking the measure of the enemy terrain, and then it scuttled up Harry's sleeve and out onto his collar and gripped his ear once firmly, which in their private grammar meant I found a loophole, and Harry, who had been raised not to weep in public and had learned it so thoroughly that he had never once needed the lesson until this exact moment, kept his composure with an effort that cost him more than the water tank ever had, and reached up and gripped back. "That," said Ron, staring, "is a hand that mailed itself to school." "That's thing," said Harry. "It's family. It'll want its own place setting." Lurch would have been proud of the paperwork Harry filed to keep it. There was, it developed, no rule at Hogwarts forbidding a student from keeping a disembodied hand as a familiar, because no one in 1,000 years had thought to write one, and Harry presented this loophole to Professor McGonagall with such grave and courteous certainty that she looked at him a long moment, and then at the hand keeping alert watch on his collar, and then wrote a note authorizing one familiar, unusual of the Potter boys to remain, and went to her office and poured herself a small sherry, and wrote to Albus that the situation was developing along lines none of them had foreseen, and that she personally had stopped trying to foresee it and had decided to enjoy it instead. Things settled into the castle the way it settled into everything, by making itself indispensable. It fetched Harry's quills. It turned the pages of his books while he took notes with both hands. It patrolled the dormitory at night and satisfied itself that none of the Slytherin ambitions sharing the room meant its boy any harm. and the one boy who tried once to shortsheet the famous Potter's bed as a test of the pecking order, woke in the small hours to find a single cold hand resting without weight upon his throat, not squeezing, only present, and did not try anything again, and became, in time, rather devoted, because there is nothing that earns a Slytherin's loyalty like being shown. Precisely and without malice, exactly how easily it could have gone the other way. Slytherin made him their seeker in his second month, which had not been done for a first year in a century, and it happened because the team captain saw him catch Neville out of the air on the flying lawn and understood correctly that a boy who could do that under no pressure at all would be unhinged to watch under a great deal of it. Harry had not asked to play. Harry had, in fact, been indifferent to Quidditch until the captain explained the position, and then he had grown interested, because the seeker's whole art was to be calm and patient in the middle of chaos, while everyone else flailed to wait to read the field, to move only when the tiny golden thing revealed itself, and then to move without hesitation. It was, Harry realized, being boring in the cup and falling in composure all at once, at altitude, and he wrote to Wednesday that the Wand people had invented a sport that was accidentally the entire curriculum, and Wednesday wrote back that she had always suspected sport was just training that had forgotten why, and that he was to win and to make it look effortless, because effortlessness frightens people more than effort. The first match was against Gryffindor in a wind off the mountains, and it put Harry 100 feet above a screaming stadium on a broom he had known for 3 weeks, and he found up there in the cold exactly the stillness he had first found hanging a hand's width above the flagstones at 7 years old. He did not chase the other seeker. He watched him the way you watch a shoulder and not a point, and let the Gryffindor boy do the tiring work of darting after every glint, and hung in the high cold quiet patient, reading the whole field beneath him, until the snitch showed itself near the pitch and both seekers dropped for it in a screaming dive. The Gryffindor boy pulled up early, because the ground was coming and his nerve was not made of what Harry's was made of. Harry did not pull up early. Harry had fallen off a scaffold onto a pile of mattresses 10,000 times, and been caught by a floor when he was 7, and been dropped into a cold tank by a girl who loved him too much to let him drown, and the ground held no fear he had not already made peace with. He rode the dive 1 full second longer than sense allowed, closed his fingers on the snitch a broom's length from the grass, and rolled out of the fall along the whole length of his body the way falling had taught him, and came up on his feet on the pitch with the golden ball held high and not one bruise to show for it, in a silence that broke, a second later, into the loudest sound the stadium had ever made. He caught the eye of the staff box as the noise came down. McGonagall had both hands pressed to her mouth. Snape was looking at him with the wary, grudging almost respect that was as close as Snape came to applause. And Dumbledore was watching him with the mild, bright fondness that never slipped, and clapping slowly and thinking. Harry could see even from the pitch that a boy who would ride a dive a second past sense for a golden ball was a boy who could be steered one day toward a nobler dive for a nobler prize if only the right cause were dangled at the bottom of it. And Harry, holding up the snitch to a roaring school, thought back at the distant twinkling old man in Wednesday's flat cadence across the whole width of the pitch. I didn't dive because I'm brave. I dive because I'm not afraid, and I'm not afraid because I've never once been alone, and you will never understand the difference, because the difference is the whole thing you took from me and my family gave back. He gave the snitch to Neville afterward, who had never held anything a whole school wanted, and Neville carried it around for a week, and that, Ron said, was somehow more Harry than catching it in the first place. The Daily Prophet ran a piece the following week, because a first-year seeker who was also the boy who lived was too much story to leave alone, and a reporter had gone digging into where the famous orphan had spent his missing decade, and had come back pale and filed 800 words under the headline "The Boy Who Lived in the House That Kept Him," describing a black mansion no map admitted, a family the reporter could only call old and rich and wrong in a way I cannot put in a newspaper. And a guardian who had answered the door, allegedly, by asking whether the reporter had come about the body. The wizarding world was scandalized, the Addams family was thrilled, Morticia had the article framed, Gomez wrote the reporter a warm letter thanking him for the phrase, "wrong in a way I cannot put in a newspaper," which he said the family intended to adopt as a motto. Fester wanted to know if there would be photographs. And Wednesday sent Harry the clipping with a single line in the margin, "They are afraid of us in print now. Good. Fear that is written down is fear that spreads on its own and asks nothing of us. Let them keep it." Harry pinned it above his greenlit desk in the dungeon, next to the family photograph with Fester's sign, and the Slytherins who came to gawk at it went away having learned, without a hex being raised, that the quiet boy in the good chair came from something that made a hardened reporter afraid to describe it, and treated that fact unnervingly as a source of pride. Draco Malfoy declared war in the second week of November, which everyone agreed was overdue. He did it in the traditional way, with an insult calibrated to require an answer, delivered in the entrance hall before a large audience. He had spent 2 months watching the boy who took his chair in his house and gave nothing back, and the not giving back had worn a hole in him, and out of the hole came the challenge. A wizard's duel, midnight, the trophy room, wands only. He expected Harry to refuse so that he could call it cowardice, or to accept in a fluster so that he could win. Harry did neither. Harry looked at him with the mild, complete attention he gave to man-eating plants and said, "All right, but not the trophy room. That's the first place Filch looks, which means someone plans to have us caught, which means this isn't a duel, it's a trap with your face on it. We'll do it properly. Dueling club, Saturday, in front of everyone, with a professor to referee so no one can say I cheated because I'm about to and I want witnesses." He inclined his head, courteous, cold. "Bring your seconds, bring your father if he'll come. I'd like a full house for this." There was a dueling club now because there was always something at Hogwarts, and on Saturday the whole school came because word had gone around, and Harry and Draco faced each other on the long dueling platform under the eye of a referee, and bowed, and Harry's bow was the terrace bow Gomez had taught him, the bow a man gives a partner he intends to dance with once and never again. Draco fired first, a good hex, fast and mean. Harry was not where it went, because Harry had given ground on the diagonal the instant he read it in Draco's shoulder and not his wand. The shoulder never lies, and the hex crackled through the empty air his composure had vacated. Draco fired again. Harry gave ground again, light and unhurried, closing no distance, offering no target, reading each spell a half-second early off the tell in the shoulder, until the whole hall understood that they were watching something they had no name for. A boy who was not casting, only moving, drawing his opponent up and down the platform like a coin between two hands, letting him spend himself, letting him tire, letting the fear climb into his casting until it went wide and wild. And then, when Draco was breathing hard and had backed himself to the platform's edge, and made the mistake Wednesday had spent 10 years teaching Harry to wait for, which was to hesitate, to think about it, Harry raised his own wand for the first time in the entire duel, and did not fire a hex at all. He flicked it, the small, precise flick thing had taught him with dropped coins and hidden keys, and Draco's own wand leapt out of his hand and across the hall and into Harry's, so that Draco stood at the edge of the platform disarmed and gaping while the boy he had challenged held both wands and had not once raised his voice. "That's the match, I think," Harry said into the ringing silence and crossed the platform and held out Draco's wand to him handle first, a courtesy so complete it was crueler than any hex. "You duel well. You just tell people what you're going to do with your shoulders a full second before your hand does it. Everyone does. My sister broke me of it when I was 6 by making me fence blindfolded until I stopped trusting my eyes." He pressed the wand into Draco's numb hand. "I didn't hurt you. I could have at any point, and I chose not to in front of everyone so that everyone would know I chose. That's worth more than a bruise. Remember it." And he bowed again and stepped down and left Draco Malfoy standing on the platform holding his own returned wand in a hall full of people who had just watched him lose without being touched, which is the only kind of losing that changes a boy, and it did change him slowly over years, into something his father would not recognize and would not have approved of, which was better. Snape cornered him after the duel in the empty potions dungeon, and it was the first honest conversation Harry had with an adult at that school. "You humiliated Mr. Malfoy in front of the entire student body," Snape said low from the shadows by the store cupboard, "and you did it without a single hex that could earn you a detention. That was not the work of a first year. That was the work of someone who was trained. By whom?" "My sister mostly," Harry said, unbothered, packing away Gomez's foil, which he had been drilling with alone. "And a hand and a man who fishes with dynamite. Why, you already know I wasn't raised by the people the headmaster left me with. You've been watching me since September to find out if I'm my father." He looked up level into the cold dark eyes that so many children flinched from. "I'm not. I've read about my father. He was brave and loud and cruel to boys who couldn't fight back, and one of the boys he was cruel to was you, and you've spent my whole first term waiting for me to be him so you know what to do with me. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I was raised by people who think cruelty to the helpless is the one true sin, and they'd have put my father in the garden for how he treated you, and told him it was for his own improvement, and meant it." The dungeon was very quiet. Severus Snape looked at the small dark boy with Lily Evans's eyes and James Potter's hair, who had just declined, precisely and without malice, to be either of them, and something in the man that had been braced for 20 years unbraced a fraction and did not know what to do with the slack. "Your mother," Snape said at last, very quietly, "was kind to me once when no one else was, before your father took her." He turned to go, black robes swinging. "You have her manner of seeing straight through a room and declining to be impressed by it. Do not mistake this for affection, Potter. Mistake it for the one warning you will get. Watch Quirinus Quirrell. And do not trust the headmaster's kindness. It always has a shape, and the shape is always a plan." He paused at the door. "You are less of a fool than your father. See that you stay that way." And he was gone in a billow of black, and Harry stood in the dungeon and understood that he had just been handed a piece of intelligence by the one man in the castle everyone else was busy suspecting, and wrote it that night to Wednesday, who wrote back, "The Frightener helped you." Of course he did, The obviously dangerous ones are almost never the problem. Keep him. He is bitter, which means he is honest, which is rarer here than danger. The ghosts told Harry everything, because Harry was the only living person in 500 years who treated them as guests rather than weather. He had cultivated them since the first feast, and by December he had the whole spectral population of the castle informally in his confidence, because a boy raised in a seance room knows the great secret of the dead, which is that they are desperately, achingly bored, and starved for anyone who will sit and listen to the same grievance for the 400th time as though hearing it fresh. Nearly headless Nick told him the gossip of the living, which ghosts collect obsessively, drifting through walls into every private room in the castle. The Grey Lady who spoke to no one spoke to Harry, because he asked her nothing and simply sat with her in companionable silence in the Ravenclaw Tower, until she volunteered one evening that she disliked the man in the turban, who muttered to himself in two voices, and that the muttering had grown worse since the thing under the third floor had been brought into the castle in the autumn. And the bloody Baron, who feared nothing and was feared by all, had adopted Harry outright, and would materialize at his shoulder in corridors where older students meant trouble, silver-bloodied and terrible, until the trouble remembered somewhere else it needed to be. "You are gathering an army of the dead," Hermione observed in the library where she had begun to spend her evenings with Harry and Ron and a growing stack of books, one lonely conversation at a time. "They're not an army," Harry said. "They're witnesses. Nothing happens in this castle that some dead person doesn't see, and no living person ever asks them, because the living are afraid of them, and being afraid of your best informers is the single stupidest thing an institution can do." He turned a page. "My mother taught me that, my second mother. She runs the best intelligence network in 3 counties, and it's made entirely of the dead and the overlooked, and it's never once failed her, because she's the only person who's ever been kind to any of them." Then it was Halloween, and the troll got in, and Harry found out what he was made of when the danger stopped being a game. It came up out of the dungeons during the feast, 12 feet of gray muscle and stench, and in the panic of the emptying hall Harry did the arithmetic Wednesday had trained into him, counted his friends, and found one missing. Hermione was not at the feast. Hermione had been in the girls' bathroom since the afternoon, crying, because a certain pale boy's certain cruel remark had finally found the one soft place in her armor, and no one had thought to tell her a mountain troll was loose in the castle, and the troll, following its nose and the castle's ancient plumbing, was walking directly toward her. Harry was moving before the prefects had finished herding, out of the file of students and against the tide, Ron a step behind him because Ron had counted 2, and things streaming along the wall beside them on its fingertips, faster than either boy, scouting ahead. They reached the bathroom a breath behind the troll and found it already inside, and Hermione backed against the shattered sinks and the club coming up. There was no seance calm in Harry now, and no need for it, because Wednesday had taught him the other thing too, the cold register, the one for real threats, and it dropped over him like the water in the tank. He did not panic. He did not throw a hex he wasn't sure of at a target he might miss with his friend behind it. He looked at the troll, 12 feet of honest, hungry stupidity, and he looked at what the room gave him, and he thought, the way his family had taught him to think at the exact center of alarming things, what does the trap need? "Ron," Harry said level, "when it turns, put out its knee. The left when it favors the right. You've got a good arm, I've seen you throw. Aim for the joint, not the head. The head's armored and the knee isn't." He was already moving as he said it, drawing the troll's eye, making himself the target the way you draw a bull off a fallen man, light on the balls of his feet, giving ground, the terrace form, reading the club in the troll's shoulders a half-second before it swung so that he was never where it came down. The troll bellowed and turned to follow him, and its bad knee turned with it, and Ron, white-faced and shaking and magnificent, put a tap running from the shattered sink straight into the joint with a levitation charm and a cricketer's aim, and the knee buckled. The troll went down to one leg. And Harry, in the half-second the fall bought him, flicked Thing off his shoulder and across the room, and Thing landed on the troll's own club where it had dropped and scrabbled up it, and by the time the troll had swung its great confused head around to find its weapon, Thing had done the thing it did best, which was to be small and quick and precise where no one was looking, and jammed a broken length of pipe into the beast's own eye fold. So that the troll reared back roaring and clutching at its face with both hands and forgot entirely about the children, and Harry got Hermione up and out from under it and had all 3 of them in one hand through the door, and the door braced shut before the troll had finished being surprised. Professors arrived to a scene of relative calm. 3 first-years and a disembodied hand standing in a corridor, breathing, unhurt, and a subdued and half-blinded troll sitting in a wrecked bathroom holding its face and reconsidering its evening. Harry gave the account, flatly and completely, and giving nothing away that need not be given, and took no points and wanted none, and walked his friends back to the warm, and only Hermione saw because Hermione saw everything, that his hands were steady and had been steady the whole time, and that this steadiness was not the absence of fear but the presence of 10 years of training, and she understood finally and fully what the strange calm boy on the train had been made into, and she was glad past speaking. To be on his side of it, you counted, she said in the corridor, not looking at him, echoing without knowing it a girl in a black notebook far to the south. In the hall, you counted your friends and you came back for the one who wasn't there. Of course I counted, Harry said. You count. It's the first thing you do when the room comes apart. My family taught me that before I could read. He looked at her, grave. You're on the list, Hermione. You've been on the list since the train. People on the list don't get left in bathrooms. That's not a thing I'll ever let happen. I was left somewhere once before I can remember, and a family found me and decided out loud that it would never happen to me again, and I've decided the same thing about the people I keep. So, you're kept. Get used to it. Hermione Granger, who had come to Hogwarts with no friends and a great deal of armor, put her face in her hands for a moment in the cold corridor, and then took it out again, composed, because she was learning, and said only, "Thank you," and meant the whole of it, and the three of them in the hand went up to the warmth together, and were, from that night, unbreakable. Hagrid gave them Flamel by accident and a dragon on purpose, and Harry loved him for both. The great gamekeeper had been kind to Harry from the start, in the uncomplicated way of large, gentle people, and Harry, who came from a family that collected the overlooked and the enormous, had taken to visiting the hut on the edge of the forest with Ron and Hermione, and a tin of Grandmamma's biscuits that Hagrid ate without asking what moved in them, which endeared him to the whole Adams household by post. It was Hagrid who let slip, flustered, that the third-floor business was between Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel and no one else, and then went pale and told them to forget he'd said it, which of course sealed it in Hermione's memory forever. And it was Hagrid who in the deep of winter acquired a dragon's egg in a card game in a village pub from a hooded stranger who had seemed very interested in the third-floor corridor, a detail Harry noted and filed for later, and hatched it on his hearth, and named the resulting spiky black horror Norbert, and loved it with his whole soft heart while it set fire to his beard. The Adams' verdict on Norbert, relayed by Return Raven when Harry wrote home about it, was unanimous and enthusiastic. Fester wanted one. Gomez declared the giant a man of taste. Grandmamma sent a recipe for something to settle a dragon's stomach, and Wednesday wrote simply, "A man who wins a rare and dangerous creature from a hooded stranger asking about the very thing you are watching has been used as a delivery service and does not know it. Be kind to the giant. Watch who gave him the egg. The stranger wanted something from a man too trusting to guard it. So does everyone in that castle." That is the whole game, Harry. Everyone there is being handed a Norbert by someone who is really after the third floor. Do not be the giant. Do not be handed anything you have not examined. And send me a scale when the dragon sheds. I want to see if it takes an edge. Albus Dumbledore watched it all and understood what he was seeing and made his move, because a patient man knows when patience has become delay. He had spent the autumn dropping breadcrumbs. A word to Hagrid, who could not keep a secret, about an old friend named Nicholas Flamel. A book left where a curious child might find it. The careful public warning about the third-floor corridor, renewed at intervals. He had built a road of clues that led, gently, inevitably, to the knowledge that the Philosopher's Stone was hidden beneath the school, and that something in the castle wanted it, and that only a brave and curious boy stood any chance of understanding the danger in time. It was the same road he had built for a dozen young heroes across his long life, and it had always worked, because young heroes are curious and brave and can be steered by their own best qualities toward the destiny an old man has chosen for them. Harry walked the road because it was the only road to the truth, and understood at every step that it was a road, and said so to his friends in the library, laying it out the way his family laid out a trap on the great table for inspection. "He wants us to find the stone," Harry said. "He's been leaving us clues since October. Flamel, the corridor, the dog, all of it. A man that careful doesn't leak. He's feeding us." He turned Hermione's notes toward himself. "The question my family taught me to ask isn't what's the secret, it's why does he want me to find it? And I think the answer is that the thing after the stone is the same thing that gave me this scar, and he wants me to face it, because there's a prophecy, McGonagall as good as said so, and he thinks I'm the only one who can, and he'd rather I walked toward it thinking it was my own brave idea than know he arranged it. Because a boy who chooses to face the dark is useful, and a boy who's been maneuvered into it is a scandal." He set down the notes. "He's not wrong that I'll face it. I will. Something's coming for me. It's been coming since before I could walk. My family have spent 10 years making me ready for it, and I am not going to waste that by hiding. But I'll do it on my terms in my time, prepared with the people I trust, and not one day before I understand the whole house. Not because he pointed. He needs to learn he can point at me all he likes, and I'll go where I was going anyway, and he'll never once get to believe he steered me. That's the only lever I have on a man with no levers, and I intend to use it." The man in the turban confirmed it in the end by being afraid of the wrong things. Harry had watched Quirrell all term, because the Grey Lady had told him to, and because his own science sense had flagged the man since the leaky cauldron. And where the whole school suspected Snape, who was cold and cruel and hovered around the third floor, Harry did not, because Harry had been raised by a family of magnificent frighteners and knew the difference between a man who wanted you to think him dangerous and a man who was. Snape wanted the suspicion. He wore his menace on the outside on purpose, the way Grandmama hung a sign that read poisons over a shelf of tea. Quirrell wanted no one to look at him at all. He stammered and flinched and made himself boring, which was being boring by which one escapes notice. The discipline Wednesday had taught Harry herself, and Harry knew it when he saw it done because it takes one to know one. It's not Snape, Harry told his friends flatly on the last night before the Christmas holidays, packing his trunk with Thing folding his robes beside him. Snape's a frightener. Frighteners aren't the danger, they're the warning label. It's the quiet one, it's the turban. He's carrying something, and it's the something under the third floor that he wants, and the reason he's afraid of two things at once is that one of the two things is riding him. He closed the trunk. But it's not going to happen over Christmas. He's not ready, and neither am I, and I'm not going to spend the holiday I could have with my family sitting in a cold castle guarding a stone for a man who won't even admit he wants me to. I'm going home. I'm going to sleep in my own coffin and fence on the terrace and drink tea with people who never once left me anywhere. And I'm going to come back in January ready, and when the turban makes his move, it's going to find that the trap it walked into wasn't built to hold what I am. He looked at his friends, at loud loyal Ron and fierce clever Hermione, the found family the castle had given him to go with the found family the storm had. Stay sharp while I'm gone, feed the ghosts. Watch the turban, and if anything happens before I'm back, you write to me and Thing will carry it, and I'll come north so fast the train will seem to be standing still. He went home for Christmas the next morning, and the family met him at the platform in a wall of black, and Fester lifted him clean off his feet, and Wednesday looked him over once professionally head to foot and found him unbroken and sharper than she'd sent him, and said only, "You've been fencing left-handed. Good." Never be predictable, and Morticia touched the scar that no one else was permitted to touch, and the whole strange loving lot of them took him home to the house that had wanted him first. Christmas at the Addams mansion was the best 2 weeks of Harry's year, and it undid, quietly and completely, whatever small erosions a term among the living had worked on him. They had decorated for the season in the family style, which meant the great hall was hung with black wreaths and the tree in the corner was dead. A magnificent leafless oak lurch had brought in from the grounds and stood in a pot, strung with tarnished ornaments, and one strand of lights Fester had wired to run off the weather. Snow fell outside the tall windows. Inside, a fire that could roast an ox roared and did not, on this occasion, roast anything, and the family gathered in it, whole again. One child larger than the empty months had left it. They gave gifts on the solstice, which Morticia held was the correct and older night. Gomez gave Harry a proper épée, sized to his growth, and wept and demanded a match on the spot, and got one up and down the great hall in their stocking feet, while the family cheered and Grandmama took bets. Morticia gave him a cloak lined in something that drank the cold. Grandmama gave him a jar of preserves and a warning about which end of it to open. Pugsley, grown tall and quiet, gave him a knife he had forged himself in the cellar with Fester, plain and balanced and honest, and Harry wore it from that day. And Fester gave him nothing wrapped at all, but took him down to the cellar on the second night and showed him what he had been building since the September letter, a device of copper and glass and patient love, and said, "It's a beacon, Harry. You wear the little half here on a chain, and I keep the big half down here always on. And if you're ever somewhere dark and you want us anywhere, any hour, you squeeze it, and the big half wakes me up, and I will come, and I will bring everyone, and it will be the loudest arrival that castle has ever regretted. I built it so you'd never be somewhere and have to wonder if we're coming. We're always coming. Now you'll be able to feel it." And Harry put the little half on its chain around his neck, under Morticia's cloak, over the picture of his first parents, and did not take it off again, and it is not too much to say that it changed what he was able to be brave about, because a boy who knows help is always coming can walk toward things a lonelier boy cannot. Wednesday did not give him a wrapped gift either. She gave him 2 weeks of the hardest training of his life, in the ballroom, on the raised plank and in the cold tank and blindfolded on the mat, because she had read every letter he'd sent and had identified, in the intelligence, exactly which of his skills the castle had let go soft, and she sharpened each of them without mercy and without one word of the affection that drove her, which Harry heard anyway in every raised plank and every dropped teacup. Because he had spent his whole life learning her language. On the last night she sat him down across the candle one final time, the way they had sat 1,000 times, and she closed her black notebook and set it aside, which she had never once done. "I'm not going to write anything down tonight," Wednesday said. "I'm going to tell you out loud because you're going back to face the thing that's been coming for you since before you could walk, and I want you to carry it in your own memory and not in my book." She folded her hands. "You are ready, not because you're perfect, because you're calm and you're kind and you count your friends when the room comes apart and you refuse the easy hot way even when it's right in front of you, and those are the only things that have ever kept anyone alive who deserved to stay that way." The thing in that castle is going to be strong and old and frightened, and it's going to try to make you frightened too, because fear is the only lever it has. Don't give it one. You've never once had to be brave alone in your whole life, and you're not going to have to start now, because we are always, always coming. She looked at him a long moment in the candlelight, the girl who had reached back for him from a coffin when he was 15 months old. Come home, Harry, whatever it costs the thing in the castle. Come home, the plant asks after you. Tell Cleopatra I'll bring her something, Harry said, and Wednesday returned the almost nothing at the corner of the mouth that was their whole language, and blew out the candle. He went back north on the first train of January, the beacon warm at his throat and the new knife at his belt and his family's whole certainty packed inside him where no cold castle could reach it. And far to the north a man in a turban paced, and a stone waited under a trapdoor, and an old man watched an empty road, and none of them knew that the boy coming toward them on the scarlet engine had spent the holiday being made, one more time, into the single most dangerous thing any of their traps had ever been unlucky enough to catch, a child with nothing left to be afraid of, coming home to finish it on his own terms. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Down the trapdoor the board began to clear itself in June, and Harry, who had been raised to notice when a room was being emptied for a reason, noticed. First, the headmaster was called away. An urgent owl from the ministry delivered at breakfast in front of the whole school, and Albus Dumbledore rose from the high table with every appearance of reluctance and left the castle for London, and Harry watched him go and thought, with the flat certainty his family had built into him, that a trap which cannot spring while the trapmaster is home is not a very good trap, and that a man who wanted a particular boy to walk toward a particular danger on his own 2 feet would, at some point, have to leave the boy alone with the danger and would arrange to be seen leaving, so that the boy would understand the coast was clear. It was well done, it was almost invisible. Harry saw it entirely. Then Quirrell moved, because Quirrell had been waiting for exactly this, and the whole castle went strange and tight, and the seance sense Harry could not turn off told him that the cold, patient wrong thing under the 3rd floor was awake now, and hungry, and close to getting what it had come for. Harry called a council of his own that afternoon in the empty library, the way his family held councils, thoroughly, because the Adamses took very few things seriously and did those few things all the way. Tonight, he said, he goes for the stone tonight while the headmaster's gone. If he gets it, the thing riding him comes all the way back, and the war my family have been getting me ready for my whole life starts 10 years early and on his terms instead of mine. He laid it out flat on the library table, the pieces of it, the way Morticia laid out a problem by the fire. I've thought about doing nothing, letting the teachers handle it. That's the sensible thing, and it's wrong because the teachers all suspect Snape and they're guarding the wrong man, and by the time they work it out the stone will be gone. I've thought about waiting for the headmaster to come back. That's wrong too, because he arranged to be gone, which means he wants me to go down there tonight, and he's right that I'm the one who has to, and I hate that he's right, and I'm going anyway because being angry that a manipulative old man pointed me at my own destiny is exactly the hot, easy mistake my sister spent 10 years training out of me. He looked at his 2 friends. So I'm going down, not because he pointed, because it needs doing and I'm the one who's ready. There's a difference, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure he never once gets to believe there isn't. We're coming, said Hermione before he had finished, and Ron said it a half-beat behind her, and Thing on the table drummed its assent, and that was settled because they were his kept, and the kept do not get left in bathrooms or anywhere else. You're coming, Harry agreed, because a boy raised by the Adams did not insult the people he loved by trying to protect them out of a fight they had chosen. But we do it prepared, we do it Adams, which means first we tell the family. He took the beacon from around his neck, the little half of copper and glass that Fester had built out of patient love, and he held it a moment, warm from his own skin, and he thought about the man in the cellar far to the south who had said we are always coming. And then he squeezed it, once hard, and somewhere 400 miles away a device the size of a wardrobe woke a sleeping uncle out of his cot with a sound like the end of the world. And Uncle Fester sat bolt upright in the dark and looked at the great half of the beacon blazing red on his workbench and bellowed, to the whole waking house, the single most joyful word he had ever had occasion to use. Harry wants US. The Adams mansion emptied in 4 minutes. It is a matter of family legend how fast they moved. Fester was dressed and armed before the echo died. Gomez had 2 sabers and his coat before Morticia had finished saying the word north. Wednesday, who slept in her clothes on principle against exactly this hour, was already at the door with a bag of things Harry might need, and a longer bag of things their enemies would not enjoy. Grandmama fired up something in the drive that had never been street legal in any country. And Thing's absence at the mansion was noted and understood, because Thing was already there with the boy, where it had always meant to be, and the family took a fierce cold comfort from knowing their youngest had not gone down into the dark alone, because a hand had mailed itself across 3 countries months ago precisely so that he never would. They came north through the short hours of the night by a route that does not appear on maps, a black car full of the strangest and most dangerous people in Britain, driving toward a castle full of wizards who had no idea what was about to arrive, and had 1 hour, perhaps two, to arrive in. It is worth lingering on that drive because the family never tired of describing it, and because it explains a great deal about what arrived at the castle. Grandmama drove, which was itself a form of warfare. The black car took the motorway north at speeds that turned the cat's eyes into a single unbroken line, and where the motorway declined to go where they were going, Grandmama simply left it, through a hedge, across a field, over a river by a bridge that was closed for repairs and objected, and the car did not so much obey the road as negotiate with it from a position of strength. Gomez rode shotgun with a saber across his knees and a map he refused to consult, navigating by instinct and the smell of the boy on the beacon, calling out turns that were always infuriatingly correct. Morticia sat serene in the back with her hands folded, calm at the center of the hurtling dark, because a mother who knows her child needs her does not waste the drive on fear. She spends it deciding what she will say to the people responsible. Pugsley loaded things in the way back. And Fester hung half out the window into the screaming wind with the great half of the beacon clutched to his chest, watching it pulse warmer and warmer as they closed the distance, shouting the temperature of it back into the car like a man calling soundings on a ship running for harbor. Warmer, he's warmer, Grandmama, he needs us, go through the church, it's faster. They went through the church. The vicar would tell the story for years. By the time the castle rose black against the graying sky, the Adams family had crossed 400 miles of a sleeping country in under 2 hours, broken every law of the road and several of physics, and arrived in exactly the condition required, furious, joyful, and entirely, murderously present. Harry did not wait for them. Waiting would have cost the stone. But he went down into the dark knowing they were coming, and it is not too much to say that this knowledge was the whole of his armor, more than the wand or the knife or the training, because a boy who knows the cavalry is already on the road can walk into a trap and treat it as a place he is simply holding until his family arrives to help him tidy up. The third-floor corridor was unlocked, and Fluffy was awake and playing to itself badly on a harp that had appeared from nowhere, which told Harry that someone had already been through, someone who knew that music sent the beast to sleep, and had enchanted the harp to keep it under while they worked below. "He's ahead of us," Hermione whispered. "He's ahead of everyone but me," Harry said, and walked up to the three-headed dog that had lain down for him in October and put out his empty hands and spoke to all three heads courteously, and the enormous beast, which had been made frightening by frightened people and had never once been frightening to the one boy who greeted it as a guest, thumped its vast tail and moved its paws off the trapdoor and let him pass, because honest monsters remember the people who were kind to them. Which is the one thing the people who chain up monsters never account for. They went down through the trapdoor into the dark, one after another, the way the family went out into the rain together, because the Adamses did nothing important alone. He had come prepared because his family did nothing important unprepared. He had the holly wand up his sleeve and Pugsley's honest knife at his belt and Gomez's foil, collapsed to a walking stick by a trick of Fester's engineering, in his hand. He had both tins in his pocket, the chamomile and the other chamomile. He had the beacon warm at his throat and the picture of his first parents over his heart and the whole certainty of his second family packed inside him where no cold could reach. And he had, riding on his collar, keeping its steady watch on the dark ahead, the hand that had mailed itself across 3 countries so its boy would never go down into anywhere alone. Wednesday would have approved of the inventory. Harry ran at once in her flat cadence, as she had taught him to run it before anything that mattered, and found himself equipped and calm and ready and went down. The obstacles the teachers had built to stop a dark wizard were, Harry found, almost perfectly designed to stop a normal child and almost perfectly useless against one who had been raised by the Adams family, because every single one of them was a thing his curriculum had already covered. The first was Devil's Snare, a great strangling plant that seized them out of the dark and began to pull them under, and Ron thrashed, which fed it, and Hermione reached for a spell, and Harry simply put his bare hand flat against the thing and introduced himself to it, as he had once introduced himself to Cleopatra at 15 months old and to every plant in the Hogwarts greenhouses since, courteously, without fear, and the Devil's Snare, which strangled the frightened and released the calm. Felt the boy who was not afraid of it and did the thing it had never once done, which was to let go of its own accord and lower all 3 of them gently to the stone, and draw its coils back to make a path, because plants, like everything else that had ever meant to hurt Harry Adams, could tell the difference between a meal and a member of the family. "How," said Ron on the floor, catching his breath, "do you keep making the monsters like you?" "I don't make them do anything," Harry said, helping him up. "I just don't lie to them. Everything down here has been chained and frightened and turned into a weapon by people it never met. I'm the first thing that's come through that treated it like a person instead of a lock. My mother taught me that, both my mothers, really. Be kind to the things everyone else finds monstrous." It's a good rule for its own sake, and it happens to also be the single most powerful thing in this castle, and nobody up there has worked it out in 1,000 years. The flying keys were nothing to a seeker. Harry hung in the cold vaulted room and watched the storm of winged keys as he watched a Quidditch pitch, patient, reading the whole field, and let the others flail after glints until the one bent old key that fit the lock showed itself. And then he moved without hesitation. The dive he had ridden past since in front of a screaming stadium, and had the key in his fist and the door opened before it had finished trying to get away. The giant chessboard was Ron's, and Ron rose to it, because Ron had grown all year alongside a friend who took competence seriously, and had stopped thinking of himself as the poor loud one and started thinking of himself as a tactician, which he was. He set them on the board and played the white side against the black with a cold nerve that Wednesday herself would have respected. And when the game came down to sacrifice, Ron made it, coolly offering himself to the enemy queen so that Harry would have the checkmate. And Harry, who had counted his friends into this room and intended to count them all out again, felt the old cold register drop over him at the sight of his friend riding a stone knight toward a stone queen's blade, and he did not panic. Because panic would have cost them the game, and he let Ron make the move because Ron had earned the right to make it, and the queen struck and Ron fell, and Harry checkmated the king in the next breath and had Hermione at Ron's side before the pieces had finished shuddering. And Ron was breathing only stunned, and Harry filed away without heat and forever, the exact face of every adult who had built a room where children had to bleed to pass, and resolved that they were going to hear about it. There was a troll already down, felled by whoever had gone ahead, and Harry stepped over it without comment, because he had dealt with his troll at Halloween and had nothing to prove to this one. And then there was the room of the potions, 7 bottles on a table and a wall of black fire behind and purple fire before, and a riddle in verse that was meant to stump a child. And Harry looked at 7 bottles and a poem about which were poison and which would let you pass, and almost laughed because he had been raised in a still room under a sign that read poisons by a grandmother who named every cup of tea after a different way of dying. And a riddle about which bottle was safe to drink was not a trial to Harry Potter Adams. It was Tuesday. Hermione, he said, read it to me, and she read it, and between the two of them, her logic and his lifetime of poisons that were really teas, they had it solved before the purple fire had stopped crackling, the smallest bottle to go forward through the black fire alone and the round bottle to go back for the others. Harry did the arithmetic of it and then did the other arithmetic, the family kind. You take the round one, he told Hermione. Go back, get Ron, get to the owlery and send for anyone who will come and hold the top of the trapdoor because my family are coming and they'll need someone living to tell them which way I went. I'm going forward, alone, not because I'm brave. Because there's only enough of the small bottle for one and it has to be me, because I'm the only one down here the thing at the bottom actually wants, and I'd rather it spend itself wanting me than reaching for any of you. Harry, Hermione said. I know, Harry said. I'll be all right. I've never once been alone in my life and I'm not starting tonight there on the road. I can feel the beacon warm. Go and open the door for them. That's the most important job down here and I'm giving it to you because you're the only one I trust to do it right. He drank the small bottle, which tasted of ice, and turned to the black fire and looked back once at his fierce clever friend, and gave her the almost nothing at the corner of his mouth that he had learned from a girl with a black notebook. Save me a scene to walk into. Make my family knock. It'll do the castle good to hear the Adamses at the door. And he walked through the black fire alone, and it did not burn him because he was calm, and the calm was the whole armor, and on the other side, in a bright cold chamber, before a tall dark mirror, a man in a purple turban was waiting for him with his back turned and 2 faces on one head. Quirrell was not stammering now. That had been the act, the being boring, and it was over, and the man who turned from the mirror of Arist was smooth and certain and unafraid of being looked at, and on the back of his head where the turban had come away was a second face, white and flat and snake-nosed and terrible, the face of the thing that had come out of the dark for a baby once and marked him and been undone by his mother's love, and had spent 10 years as less than a ghost, riding lesser men, waiting to come back. Harry Potter, said the 2 voices, the smooth one and the cold hissing one under it. How good of you to come. I confess I wondered whether you would. The headmaster's little road of clues was laid so carefully and you walked it so reluctantly. He thinks he steered you here. I know better. You came because you are not afraid, and I have spent a very long time learning that the ones who are not afraid are the only ones worth the trouble of killing. That's the first true thing anyone's said to me in this castle all year, Harry said, and he said it flatly, courteously, standing very still in the cold, bright room with his hands loose and his family on the road, and he looked at the thing on the back of the man's head with the exact frank appraising interest he had once turned on a man-eating plant, and found it, on the whole, less impressive than Cleopatra, who at least was honest. You're the cold thing I've felt under the floor all year. I have to tell you, you've been much scarier at a distance. Up close you're a man wearing a bad hat over a face that lost a fight with a baby. My Uncle Fester has a better second face and he keeps it in a jar. The cold voice hissed. The smooth one smiled. Brave words, let us see the boy behind them. Look in the mirror, Harry Potter, tell me what you see. The headmaster hid my stone inside it, the fool, keyed to a heart that wants the stone but does not want to use it, and I have stood before it an hour and cannot reach the trick of it. But you, look, tell me what you see, and we will discover together what your heart truly wants. And Harry looked into the mirror of Arist, which shows the deepest desire of the heart that stands before it, the mirror that had trapped grown wizards for lifetimes because most hearts want things they cannot have and cannot stop wanting. And Harry Potter Adams, 11 years old, raised from a basket in the rain by people who had wanted him out loud every single day of his life, looked into the mirror that shows you the thing you lack and saw nothing he did not already have. He saw his family. Not gaining them, not getting them back, not some ache-filled. He saw them arriving, all of them, Fester in the lead with a light bulb glowing in his mouth, Gomez with both sabers up, Morticia serene and terrible, Grandmama, Pugsley and Wednesday, deadpan and exact, coming through a door to stand at his shoulder. Because that was the only thing his heart had ever wanted or ever would, and it was not a thing the mirror could dangle out of reach, because it was already true and already coming, and the beacon was warm at his throat. And because his heart wanted nothing the mirror could withhold, because a boy who has been loved completely cannot be trapped by a glass that runs on longing, the trick of the mirror simply opened for him, the way the devil's snare had opened, the way Fluffy had, the way every honest dangerous thing in his life had opened for the one child who had never once come to it in fear or want. And the philosopher's stone, small and red and heavy, dropped out of the glass and into his pocket, and Harry felt it land. And did not change his face by a hair. Well, hissed the cold voice greedy, what do you see? My family, Harry said honestly, because he had been raised to tell the truth and to use it as a weapon. Coming through a door, it's the only thing I've ever wanted, and I already have it, which is why your mirror's got nothing to offer me and just gave me the thing you've been standing in front of for an hour trying to steal. He let that land. You built your whole self out of wanting things, didn't you? Power you didn't have, life you'd lost, a body that wasn't yours. You're the hungriest thing I've ever met, and I grew up with a man-eating plant. And you came for me as a baby because someone told you I'd grow up to be a danger to you, and you were right, except you got the reason wrong. I'm not a danger to you because of a prophecy. I'm a danger to you because I'm the one thing you can't understand in this whole cold, hungry world you've made. I don't want anything you have. And people who want nothing can't be bought or frightened or steered or trapped. Ask the headmaster. He's been trying all year. Kill him, shrieked the cold voice, and the smooth man lunged, hands out for Harry's throat. And Quirrell's hands closed on Harry Potter Adams, and began at once to blister and burn and crack and smoke, because the thing that had ridden the man for a year could not bear to touch the boy, could not bear the skin of a child who had been marked by one mother's dying love and then wrapped every single day for 10 years in a second family's living one, until love was not a scar on him but a substance, worked all the way through, the way salt works through the sea. The protection Lily Potter had died to lay was still there, at the root of him. But the Addams family had spent a decade watering it, and it had grown into something no ghost of hunger could lay a hand on and keep the hand. Quirrell screamed, both voices at once, and reeled back with his palms ruined and smoking, and Harry did not press the advantage, because Harry did not need to, because at that exact moment, 400 miles of night driven in under 2 hours by people who did not respect speed limits or the laws of several nations, the Addams family arrived. They did not knock. Hermione had held the trapdoor for them as she'd been told and had pointed the way, and they came down through the castle and through the obstacles that were nothing to them. Fester eating the black fire like a man walking into a warm bath, and they came into the cold, bright chamber in a wall of black at the exact moment their boy needed a scene to walk into. And Uncle Fester took one look at the smoking, screaming man with 2 faces and the small, calm child standing untouched in front of the mirror of Arist. And Fester's face did the thing it had done in the parlor 11 years before, the traffic jam of every large emotion at once, and then Fester grinned the grin that had frightened 3 continents and reached into his coat and took out the light bulb and put it in his mouth, and it glowed. Hello, said Uncle Fester, luminous, delighted, and dangerous, to the thing that had left his boy in the reign of the world. I understand you've been bothering my nephew. What happened next entered family legend before the night was out, and the tellings grew, but the bones of it were these. The thing on the back of Quirrell's ruined head took one look at the wall of black pouring into its cold, bright chamber and understood, in the instant it takes a predator to recognize a larger predator, that it had made a catastrophic error of address. It had come for a frightened orphan. It had found instead a boy it could not touch, standing calm in front of a mirror that had just handed him the prize, and behind the boy, filling the doorway in the room, and it seemed the possibilities of the evening. A family that regarded the 2-faced man not with the terror it fed on, but with the mild collective interest of people who have arrived at a dinner party slightly late and are deciding where to sit. Gomez, said Morticia, drifting into the chamber in a trail of black that drank the cold light, surveying the smoking, screaming man with the courteous distaste of a hostess who has found a stain on the good tablecloth. That is the creature that left our Harry in the reign of the world, the one the letter was about, the hungry one. I recognize the type, Carita, said Gomez, and he had both sabers out, and he was smiling the smile that had ended arguments at weddings, and he began to advance across the chamber at an unhurried, murderous, delighted stroll. We buried one of his cousins under the east lawn. He's doing wonderfully. He's a wisteria. Voldemort, wearing the smooth ruin of Quirrell, drew itself up and threw magic at them. Real magic, the killing kind, green light and cold fire and a wind full of teeth. The arsenal that had emptied a war and cowed a nation, and it was, against the Addams family, very nearly enough to make them take a step back, which was the closest any of them came to being impressed. Gomez fenced the green light. He did not block it. You cannot block the killing curse. Gomez had never once in his life met a rule he could not turn into a dance, and he stepped off the line the exact instant Wednesday had taught Harry to step off it, watching the shoulder and never the wand, and the green light went by him into the wall and cracked it. And Gomez laughed with the pure animal joy of a man whose whole life had been leading, without his knowing, to duel with a dark lord, and closed the distance a saber length at a time. Wednesday walked in at her mother's side, deadpan and exact, and took in the whole chamber at a glance, the mirror, the burning man, the fleeing thing already beginning to smoke free of its ruined host, and her boy, standing untouched in the center of it, alive, composed, holding something red in his pocket that she clocked and catalogued without a word. She had spent 10 years in a black notebook full of intelligence preparing for exactly this hour, the reckoning she had promised the family by the fire when Harry was 15 months old, and now that it had come she met it as she met everything, without raising her voice. "Harry," Wednesday said, across the chamber, over the shrieking and the cold fire, in the flat voice that had taught him to fall and to stand and to keep his composure while the room came apart. "Report." "I'm not hurt," Harry called back, calm, standing his ground in front of the mirror. "It can't touch me. The shield holds, mother's and yours both, all the way through. The stone's in my pocket. The man's finished. The thing that was riding him is coming loose. It'll try to flee. It can't die. It made sure of that years ago in ways I don't understand yet. But it can be sent running, and it's about to run, and I want it to run past all of you so it understands forever exactly what it walked into when it came for me." "Understood," said Wednesday, and it was the proudest single word she had ever spoken, and only Harry heard everything that was folded under its flat surface. Quirrell, or what the thing had made of Quirrell, came apart then, not in blood, because this is not that kind of story, but in ash and ruin, crumbling where Harry's shield had burned him, collapsing in on the hollow the passenger had eaten out of him over a long cold year, until there was nothing left standing of the man but a fall of grey dust and an empty purple turban, and out of the dust rose the thing itself, at last unhoused, a wraith the shape of a screaming face. Thin as smoke and cold as the bottom of a well, everything that was left of the most feared wizard in the world. It fled. It had no body and no host and no choice. It fled for the crack in the wall and the night beyond, and its path took it, as Harry had wanted, directly through the ranks of the Addams family, and each of them in turn gave it a send-off it would carry into whatever long cold exile it was bound for. Grandmamma swatted at it with her handbag and told it had bad color and worse manners. Pugsley threw something at it that went off with a bang and a smell. Gomez saluted it with both sabers, gravely, as a defeated opponent who had at least had the decency to lose. Morticia watched it come and did not move and did not blink, and said to it in the velvet voice that made candles lane, "You left him in the rain, and we took him in, and look what he grew into. Look what love did that you will never once understand. Carry that with you. It is the only wound we can give a thing that cannot die, and it is enough." And the wraith flinched from her worse than from any curse, and Wednesday, as it passed her, said nothing at all. She only reached into her longer bag, the one full of things their enemies would not enjoy, and took out a fencing foil, Harry's own, the one Gomez had sent north in a smoking crate, and she flicked it up into the wraith's screaming path, not to kill it because it could not be killed, but to touch it once precisely on the center of where its chest would have been. The terraced touch, the filthy, gorgeous, underhanded touch that says the match is over and you did not land a single hit. And the wraith recoiled from the cold iron and the colder girl behind it and tore itself the last distance to the crack in the wall and was gone into the night, shrieking, less than a ghost, fled, defeated, alone, which was the one condition it had spent its whole hungry life trying to inflict on everyone else and had now at last earned. And then the chamber was quiet and full of Adamses, and in the center of it stood Harry, alive, untouched, holding a red stone in his pocket and the whole certainty of his family around him, and it went through him, the thing the wraiths passing always did to the scar, a lance of cold old pain that would have dropped a lonelier boy where he stood. He did not drop. He put his hand to the scar and breathed and stayed on his feet, because he had never once in his life been alone with his pain, and he was not alone now, and Uncle Fester was across the chamber and had him gathered up before the pain had finished, the light bulb tumbling from his mouth, both arms around his boy, holding him as he had the night of the rain. "I've got you," Fester said over and over into Harry's hair, not caring that his own face was leaking again, not caring who saw, because some kinds of leaking were sacred. I've got you, I've got you, we came as fast as the car would go, and Grandmama drove through a hedge in Scotland. We're here, you can stop being brave now, I've got you." "I know," Harry said into his uncle's coat, which smelled of ozone and home. "I never stopped knowing you were coming, that's the whole reason I could go down." Ron and Hermione came through the black fire then, having held the trapdoor and sent the owls and refused in the end to stay above while their friend was below, and they arrived into a chamber full of the strangest family in Britain, embracing a small dark boy in the ruins of a dark lord, and Hermione took in the ash and the empty turban and the red stone and the living breathing Harry, and did the arithmetic and put her face in her hands for exactly 1 second, and then took it out again. Composed, because she had learned, and said, "You solved the potion riddle, didn't you? You beat him to the mirror. You had the whole thing worked out before we came down." "I had it worked out at Christmas," Harry said. "I just needed my family to walk in at the end. It's not really an Adam's victory unless somebody arrives who wasn't invited." Grandmama was already going through the ash where Quirrell had been, on her knees, sorting the gray dust with a professional thoroughness and pocketing anything that caught her fancy. "There's always something worth keeping in the remains of a wicked man," she announced, holding up a scorched button to the cold light. "Button's teeth, the occasional soul, though this one had spent his, waste not." Gomez surveyed the empty turban with the sorrow of a connoisseur. "A poor showing at the end," he said. "All that power, and he never once learned to lose with style. That is the tragedy of the wicked, my boy. No manners. Now, and Adams knows how to lose. We simply arranged never to do it." And Morticia took the red stone gently from Harry's fingers and turned it in the light, considering, and said, "This is the thing that makes gold and the water that keeps a man alive forever. 2 things no one in this family has ever wanted. We are rich enough and we intend to die eventually. It is one of the few pleasures we are still looking forward to. Give it back to the old man in the morning, my darling, and let him decide whether to destroy it. It is exactly the kind of terrible temptation that a person like him should be made to sit with alone and refuse." She pressed it back into Harry's palm and closed his fingers over it. "You wanted nothing it could offer either. That is why the mirror opened for you. Remember that always. The whole world will spend your life trying to make you want things so that it can steer you by the wanting. Keep wanting only this, only us, only the ordinary impossible fact of being loved, and you will walk through every trap they build for you the way you walked through the black fire, untouched, because they will never have anything you need." Albus Dumbledore arrived, who was not invited, some minutes later, having realized halfway to London that the ministry summons was a forgery, and turned back and flown the last miles by means the school did not advertise. And he came down through his own obstacles and through the black fire, and into the cold bright chamber, expecting to find the culmination of the plan he had laid so carefully across a whole year. A brave, lonely boy who had faced the darkness and won, and would need, now, an old man to explain it all to him and hold him and become, in that grateful aftermath, the guide the boy had refused all year. He found, instead, a party. He found the Addams family, all of them, arrayed around their youngest in the ruins of Lord Voldemort. Gomez sheathing his sabers, Morticia adjusting the fall of Harry's collar, Grandmama going through the ash for anything worth keeping, Fester still holding the boy with both arms, Wednesday standing a little apart cleaning a fencing foil, and Harry himself, alive and calm and entirely unharmed, turning the philosopher's stone over in his fingers with the mild interest of a child examining a marble. Having resolved the whole engineered trial completely off the script, without needing to be saved, in the company of a family the headmaster had not sent for and could not have stopped, the old man stood in the doorway of his own trap and understood one final and complete time that it had never been his at all. "Ah," said Albus Dumbledore after a moment, because a century of composure is a hard thing to lose entirely. "I see I have arrived late to my own arrangements." "You have," Morticia agreed, turning to face him, and the temperature of the chamber went down with her voice, and she did not raise it, because the Adamses did not raise their voices. They did the opposite, and let the room lean in to be frightened. "You laid a road for a child to walk toward his death because a prophecy told you he might have to, and you cleared the board and left the castle so he would think the choice was his, and you were willing to let it cost him whatever it cost, because you had decided long ago in a comfortable office that this particular child was a thing to be spent." She crossed the chamber to stand before the old man, tall and pale and terrible and unhurried. "We have some things to discuss, headmaster, you and I, about what a child is for. But not here and not tonight, because tonight my son is tired and has just done your whole year's work for you in an evening, and is going to be taken somewhere warm and fed something that no medical authority would endorse, and told, by every person who loves him, exactly how proud we are, which is nearly unbearably. Tomorrow you may come to us in the morning and we will have the other conversation. Bring the honest one. The bitter potion's master, he at least does not smile while he does it." She inclined her head precisely, the exact degree that meant, "I see what you are, and we are not finished." Good evening, Professor. Thank you for the school. It has been very educational, chiefly about you. And Albus Dumbledore, who had not been spoken to in that manner in 100 years, and who deserved it, said nothing at all and stood aside, and let the Adams family carry their boy up out of the dark and passed him into the light, and was left alone in the ruined chamber with an empty turban and a fall of grey ash and the dawning, terrible understanding that the most important child in Britain had grown up entirely beyond his reach, and had just saved the wizarding world as a favor rather than a duty, and did not need him, had never needed him, and that everything the old man had built his long life's plan upon had been, from the very first night, resting on a doorstep in the rain, from which someone kinder and stranger than he had picked it up while he slept. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. A word with the headmaster. The Adams family took over a wing of Hogwarts the way ivy takes over a wall, quietly, completely, and without anyone quite deciding to allow it. By the morning after the trapdoor, they had installed themselves in a disused tower the castle had been keeping empty for exactly the sort of guests no one wanted, and by noon it had become unmistakably theirs. Morticia had hung something over the window. Grandmamma had commandeered a corner of the kitchens and was teaching the house elves recipes that made them weep with a joy they had not known was available to them. Gomez had found the one professor who could fence, which was Flitwick, and the two of them were going at it up and down a corridor to the delight of a growing crowd. Fester had made friends with the giant squid. And Wednesday had gone straight to the library, presented Madame Pince with a list of the restricted texts she required and been refused, and had then simply read them anyway, silently in a chair by the window, defying anyone to be the one to physically remove her, which no one was. The castle did not know what to do with them, so it did the only sensible thing, which was to be enchanted. The details of that takeover were still being traded as legend at the school years later, by which time most of them were true. Gomez and Flitwick fenced every morning for a week, and it became an event. Students skipped breakfast to watch the tiny professor and the mustachioed madman go at each other up and down the trophy corridor with a speed and joy that left both of them breathless and beaming. And on the last morning Flitwick, who had been a dueling champion in his youth and had not been properly tested in 40 years, landed a touch and wept, and Gomez embraced him and declared him a brother, and endowed on the spot with a bag of goblin gold and a speech, the Adams chair of blade work, which the school did not know how to decline and so accepted, and which is the reason there is fencing at Hogwarts to this day. Fester and the Weasley twins found one another the way two lightning strikes find the same tree, and the friendship terrified the staff. Fester showed them the beacon and the light bulb and a thing he could do with a car battery that emptied a classroom, and the twins showed him the kitchens and the secret passages in a swamp they were developing. And by the end of the week the three of them had drawn up plans for a joke shop that would, some years later, actually exist, and would carry in its back room a line of alarming novelties credited on the label to Uncle F. Consulting. Morticia and Professor McGonagall took tea together 3 times, and it started as reconnaissance on both sides and became, to the surprise of both women, a genuine friendship between two people who had spent their lives being the most formidable person in every room and had almost never met an equal. They talked about the raising of dangerous children. McGonagall confessed she had never married, never had children of her own, and had spent 40 years mothering other people's in the only way the job allowed, at a distance, letting them go. And Morticia said that letting them go was the whole of it, that the trick was to build them so completely that the letting go did not empty you, because a thing you have made well goes out into the world and remains, somehow, still yours. And McGonagall was quiet a long time after that, and then poured them both more tea, and the two of them watched the students crossing the grounds below the window, dangerous and loved and going out into the world, and understood each other entirely. And Wednesday and Severus Snape circled each other all week like two cats who have discovered a third cat is not, after all, the only serious animal in the house. She had gone to him because he was the one adult in the castle who did not perform, and he had received her because she was the one student who did not either, and they had a conversation in the potions dungeon that neither of them ever fully reported, about poisons that were really poisons and poisons that were really theater, and the exact and useful line between them. And at the end of it Snape had done a thing he had not done in 20 years, which was to unlock the true restricted cabinet. The one behind the one everyone knew about, and let a 17-year-old girl read the labels, because he had recognized in her the specific rare seriousness that does not misuse dangerous knowledge but is only made careful by it. Your brother, Snape said at the end, is the most composed child I have ever taught, but you are the one who made him. I can always tell the blade from the hand that ground it. And Wednesday, who was complimented perhaps twice a decade and trusted it perhaps never, inclined her head the exact degree that Morticia had taught her meant I see you, and we are, briefly, the same kind of thing, and the two most exacting people in the castle parted with a mutual respect that neither would ever have embarrassed the other by naming. The morning had begun in the hospital wing, where the family had descended on the survivors of the night before with a competence that alarmed Madame Pomfrey and comforted everyone else. Ron was there, propped up and grumbling and entirely well, having taken a stone queen's blow to the head and come out of it with nothing worse than a magnificent bruise and a story he would dine on for the rest of his life. Grandmamma took one look at him, pronounced Pomfrey's methods timid, and produced from her apron a small bottle of something green that she made him drink over the nurse's objections, and within the hour Ron's bruise had gone down and his color had come up, and he reported feeling, in his own words, brilliant and also like I could see sounds, which Grandmamma said was the sign it was working. She left the bottle. Pomfrey confiscated it. It reappeared in Grandmamma's apron by lunch, because some things cannot be confiscated. Hermione had not slept, having spent the night organizing the intelligence, and Morticia found her in a chair by Ron's bed surrounded by notes, running on nothing but worry and a fierce refusal to rest until everyone was accounted for, and Morticia sat down beside her and did the thing she did best, which was to make a frightened, clever girl feel that the counting was finished and she was allowed now to set it down. You brought the family down through the fire, Morticia told her. You held the door, you did the most dangerous job in the whole castle, and you did it perfectly, and everyone is alive, and you may stop now. He is safe, they are all safe, you are permitted to sleep. And Hermione, who had never once in her life been given permission to stop, looked at the pale, serene, terrible, beautiful woman who had raised the calmest boy she knew, and put down her notes and slept finally in the chair, and woke to find someone had put a black traveling cloak over her, lined in something that drank the cold. Neville was there too, having insisted on helping, and Fester had taken an immediate shine to him and shown him the beacon and told him in complete seriousness that any friend of Harry's could squeeze it if they were ever in the dark and wanting the Adamses, and that the offer was permanent and extended to the whole strange little group. And Neville, who had grown up being told he was not enough of anything, carried that offer around inside him for the rest of his life and stood a little taller under it. Because a boy who knows the cavalry will come for him can face things a lonelier boy cannot, and this was the great secret the Adams family gave away for free to everyone Harry loved. The conversation Morticia had promised the headmaster happened at 10 o'clock in the round office at the top of the tower, and it was not a shouting match because the Adamses did not shout, and it was not a negotiation because there was nothing left to negotiate. It was a reckoning, and it was conducted on the family's side in the cold, quiet register they reserved for real things. They came in a delegation. Morticia and Gomez, Harry because it was his life, Wednesday because she kept the ledger. And at Morticia's specific invitation, Severus Snape, the honest one, the bitter potions master, who came because he had been asked and because he wanted, after 20 years, to hear the old man say some things out loud. Albus Dumbledore received them from behind his cluttered desk, among the whirring silver instruments and the one that had gone dead 11 years before, and he had had all night to prepare, and he was very good, and he began with the truth, because he had understood at last that with these people nothing else would survive contact. I owe this family an accounting, he said, and I will give it completely because you have earned it and because the boy has earned it most of all. He folded his long hands. There is a prophecy. It was made before Harry was born, and it named him, or a boy like him, as the only one with the power to end Lord Voldemort. Voldemort heard half of it and acted on the half, and in acting on it he made the prophecy true and marked the boy and destroyed himself for a time. But only for a time. He is not gone. You saw him flee last night. You know he cannot die because he has done something to himself, something very dark, to bind himself to life in pieces. He will return, and when he returns, the prophecy will still stand, and it will still say that this boy is the one who must face him. He looked at Harry, and the fondness in his face was real, which was the whole tragedy of him. I placed you with your mother's sister because your mother's death left a protection in her blood that would shield you until you came of age. That was true, and it was sound, and it was the best protection in the world. And I placed you there also, I will confess it, because I believed a boy raised without indulgence, without fame, without knowing his own importance, would grow up humble and kind and ready, when the hour came, to do the hard thing the prophecy asked. I meant to raise a boy who could give himself, if giving himself was what the world required. I told myself it was for the greater good. I have told myself that about a great many things for a very long time, and I have been right often enough to have stopped checking. The office was quiet, the instruments whirred. You meant to raise a martyr, Harry said, not angrily. He said it the way his family said the true things, flatly, so it could not be argued with. You looked at a baby whose mother had just died to save him, and you decided the best thing to do with that gift was to keep it lonely and grateful, so that when you needed it to walk toward its own death it would go, because it wouldn't have anything to stay for. He was not accusing. He was only naming it the way you name a poison so it loses its power to frighten. You weren't cruel about it. That's the part people won't understand. You'd have wept the whole time. You'd have loved me sincerely right up until the moment you spent me. That's worse than cruelty, sir. Cruelty you can see coming. You were going to do it kindly. Yes, said Albus Dumbledore, because he was, whatever else he was, too old and too tired to lie to the child's face any longer. I was. And to his credit, which the family noted because they noted everything, he did not defend it, and he did not weep to make them pity him, and he did not reach for the greater good again. Sat with it the naked shape of the thing he had intended, under the eyes of a family that had done the opposite and let it be as ugly as it was. Then Morticia spoke, and she did not raise her voice, and the temperature of the round office went down and down. We are going to tell you what we did instead, she said, so that you understand the size of your error, not as a reproach, but as an education, because you are clearly a man who has not been educated in a very long time, and it is never too late. She inclined her head toward Harry. We found him in the rain on the step where your instructions left him, and we took him home, and we told him the truth every single day. We told him a war had marked him and might come back for him. We did not hide it to keep him humble. We armed him with it. We taught him to fall and to stand and to keep his composure while the room came apart. We taught him that the dangerous, honest things are never the ones to fear, and that the smiling ones are. We taught him that he was wanted out loud without condition from the first hour, so that he would grow a floor under himself that nothing could pull up. She let that settle in the cold quiet. You wanted a boy with nothing to live for so that he would be willing to die. We made a boy with everything to live for, and do you know what we found, headmaster? We found that he is braver than your martyr would ever have been. He walked down into your trap last night not because he had nothing to lose, but because he had us and knew we were coming, and a child who knows he is loved will walk toward worse things than a child who has given up. You had the whole calculation backward. Love does not make them fragile, it makes them unbreakable. You spent a century of cleverness and never learned the one thing my brother-in-law who fishes with dynamite has always known. The strongest thing you can put into a person is the certainty that someone is always coming for them. Dumbledore was silent a long moment. I believe, he said at last quietly, that you may be the wisest person who has ever sat in that chair, madam, and I have entertained ministers and champions and at least one saint. He turned to Harry, and something in the old man had changed. Some long-held certainty finally set down. I have spent your whole life planning to use you, and you have spent it becoming someone who cannot be used, and I find to my very great surprise that I am glad. I am too old to change what I am. But I am not too old to change what I do, and I will not from this day lay one more secret road for your feet to walk. If you wish to know a thing, you will ask me, and I will tell you the truth, all of it, the first time. That is the most I have offered anyone in 50 years. It is yours if you want it. I want it, Harry said, not because I trust you. I don't yet, and you shouldn't expect me to. You haven't earned it, and a man who's earned distrust and gets trust anyway just learns that distrust is free. He rose, precise, courteous. But my family taught me that you keep your enemies close and your teachers closer, and you're both, and I'd rather have you where I can watch you learn to be honest than out there being sorry in private, which is the most dangerous thing you do. So, you'll be my teacher, not my shepherd. And the first true thing you can tell me, since you're offering, is the whole of that prophecy, word for word today, because it's about my life, and I've noticed that the people who keep prophecies secret are always the people who want to be the ones who decide what they mean. Albus Dumbledore looked at the 11-year-old boy who had just, without raising his voice, taken command of the single most important secret of the coming war, and he began quietly to laugh, an old man's laugh with a century of weariness, and under it something that might have been relief, the relief of a man who has carried a thing alone too long and has just been informed, courteously and immovably, that he will not be permitted to carry it alone any longer. And he told him the whole prophecy, word for word, the first true thing. Snape watched the entire exchange from the shadows by the door and said nothing, and when it was over he followed the family out, and in the corridor he stopped Harry with a word. Your mother, Snape said stiffly, because kindness came to him the way water comes uphill, would have done exactly what you just did. She never once let a powerful man tell her what a thing meant. She made him show his work. He looked at the boy a moment longer. I have spent 11 years agreeing to watch over you as a debt I owed her ghost. I find this morning that it has stopped being a debt. Do not tell anyone. I have a reputation. And he swept off down the corridor in a bill of black, and Harry watched him go and understood that he had just been given grudgingly in the only language the man owned, something very close to love, and he wrote it that night to Wednesday, who wrote back only, "The frightener is yours now. Well done." The bitter ones are the most loyal once they decide. Do not waste him. There was the matter of the stone, and Harry settled it before he left the office because his mother had told him to make the old man sit with the temptation alone. He took the red stone from his pocket and set it on the cluttered desk between them in the light of the whirring instruments and pushed it across with one finger. It makes gold and it keeps a man alive forever, Harry said. My family doesn't want either. We're rich enough and we intend to die eventually. My grandmother's rather looking forward to it, so it's yours. But my mother says you should be the one to decide whether to destroy it, and that you should have to decide it alone, sitting here with the thing right in front of you, because a man who spent his life making hard choices for other people's good ought to be made to make one for his own, where no one's watching and there's no one to be noble for. He rose. I think you'll destroy it. I think you're a better man than the plan you made for me, but I'm not going to make it easy by taking it away. That would be doing to you exactly what you tried to do to me, deciding what you're for. So it's your choice. It always was. Make it a good one. Nicholas Flamel and his wife would die within the year. The family learned later, having chosen, after a long good life, to let the stone be destroyed and to go into the dark together like people going to a well-earned rest, and Gomez pronounced it the most romantic thing he had heard all decade and toasted them for a week. Gomez had a contribution to the reckoning too, and he made it on the way out at the door with his hand on the frame, in the warm, terrible voice he used for the things beneath his good cheer. "Headmaster," Gomez said, "my wife has told you the wise things, and my son has told you the sharp ones, and I will tell you the simple one, which is the one I know best. You had a boy in the rain, and you left him there for reasons. We had a boy in the rain, and we took him in for no reason at all, because he was cold and we were passing, and a child alone in the wet is not a thing a person laves, if the person is a person. Everything else, the training and the prophecy and the war, all of it comes after that one difference. You are a man of reason, sir. It is your great gift, and it is the whole straight through the middle of you. Some things you do not do for a reason. You do them because a baby is in the rain. Learn that at your age, and you may yet be worth the trust my son is mad enough to offer you." And he bowed precisely and swept out after his family, and Albus Dumbledore sat alone with a stone and a prophecy and the two truest things anyone had said to him in 100 years, and did in the end both of the hard things alone where no one could see, which is the only place the hard things ever really count. The wider world was told very little, and the family preferred it that way. The ministry was informed that Professor Quirrell had died in an accident of his own dark making, and that the stone was safe, and the ministry, which did not want a public scare, asked no hard questions and was grateful to be spared them. The Daily Prophet ran 3 inches on an inside page. And the truth that Lord Voldemort had ridden a professor and reached for immortality and been driven shrieking out of the castle by an 11-year-old and his frankly indescribable family was kept quiet by everyone who knew it, partly for the ministry's peace of mind and mostly because, as Wednesday observed, an enemy who has been humiliated in private and cannot brag about it is far more useful than one who has been made a public martyr. "Let him remember it alone in the dark," she said. "The worst thing you can do to a hungry thing is beat it where no one sees, so it can't even have the dignity of the story. He will spend years failing to explain to his own followers why he is afraid of a family of undertakers. That is a better punishment than any we could build." The rest of the term dissolved into the strange warm chaos of a school that had acquired the Addams family and could not quite bring itself to want them gone. The end-of-year feast was the loudest anyone remembered. Slytherin won the House Cup cleanly on points earned across the whole year, and Harry received the news with the mild interest he gave to most trophies, because his family had raised him to compete with himself and no one else. But the feast was not really about the cup. It was about the long table where, by special dispensation the castle had stopped trying to prevent, the Addams family sat as guests of honor, alarming the first years and delighting the ghosts, Gomez telling a story with both sabers, Morticia in conversation with a fascinated McGonagall about the finer points of raising dangerous children, Grandmama feeding the bloody baron something that made even a 500-year-old ghost look twice. Fester with a light bulb in his mouth, surrounded by a rapt audience of Weasley twins who had found, at last, their spiritual master and were taking notes. Dumbledore found Harry once during the feast, in the way an old man finds a moment in a loud room, and sat beside him for the length of a single course and did not twinkle and did not maneuver and said only, "I destroyed it, the stone, alone, as you said, in an empty office with it right in front of me. It was the hardest ordinary thing I have done in a very long time, and you were right that I needed to do it where no one could admire me for it." He looked out over the loud, bright hall, at the ghosts and the students and the impossible black-clad family holding court at the head table. "I have been the cleverest man in every room for 100 years, Harry. It is a lonely way to be right. I think I had forgotten there was another way to be right until a family of undertakers drove through a church to teach it to me." He rose, an old man among children, lighter by one terrible plan. "Thank you for the tea all those months ago. You told me then that you already knew who you were. I did not believe you. I believe you now." And he went back to the high table, and Harry watched him go, and thought that a manipulative old man who has learned to say a true thing out loud, plainly, without an angle, is either the most dangerous kind or the least, and that it would take years to learn which, and that his family had taught him how to wait and watch and find out, and that this, too, was a kind of homecoming. And Wednesday sat at the Slytherin table beside her brother, deadpan and exact, and watched him among his friends, the loud loyal one and the fierce clever one and the overlooked boy he had caught out of the air, and she took out her black notebook, and she wrote in it one last entry for the year, and she let Harry read it upside down, which she had never once done on purpose. "He is loved here too," it said, "not only by us." I was afraid the world would be too small for him, and it is, but he keeps building bigger rooms inside it and filling them with the overlooked, which is what Mother does, which is the only thing that has ever worked against the cold. He does not need me anymore. This should make me sad. It does not. It makes me proud, which is a worse feeling, and I resent it. He turned out worth the trouble. I knew he would at 15 months. Do not tell him I wrote any of this. Below it she had drawn in her spare exact hand the almost nothing at the corner of a mouth that was their whole language, and Harry read it and gave it back to her across the loud bright hall, and neither of them said a word, because there was nothing to say that the silence was not already saying better. Draco Malfoy came to the Slytherin table on the last night alone without his furniture and stood a moment and then said stiffly to Harry, "You could have made me look a fool all year. In the duel. In front of everyone, you didn't. You gave me my wand back." He worked at it, the thing he had come to say, which did not have a shape his father had ever taught him. "I don't know what that was, but I've been thinking about it, and I don't think I want to be the kind of person who has to be shown mercy by a person he was rude to, so..." He held out his hand, the same hand Harry had declined on the train, offered now without the price tag. "No angle, just an apology, that's all it is." Harry looked at the hand and took it because his family collected the overlooked and had never once refused a genuine coming back, and because a boy who had been given a second family knew better than anyone what it cost a person to want to be better than they'd been made. "That's the first thing you've offered me that wasn't a lever," Harry said. "Keep doing that. You'll be dangerous someday, Malfoy, in the good way, the way where people are glad you came." And Draco went away lighter than he had come, and it was, Ron said later, somehow the strangest and most Harry thing that had happened all year, that the villain of the story had walked off having decided quietly to stop being one, because someone had declined to break him when they could have. Harry went down to Hagrid's hut on the second to last day, with Ron and Hermione and a tin of Grandmamma's biscuits to say goodbye and to settle the question of Norbert. The dragon had grown to the size of a large and extremely flammable dog and had eaten most of a shed, and Hagrid loved it with a grief already gathering in him, because he knew, in the soft, honest way of large, gentle people, that he could not keep it, that a dragon in a wooden hut was a tragedy waiting for a spark. The authorities were arranging for Norbert to go to a reserve in Romania, and Hagrid was trying to be brave about it and failing at the edges. "We'll come and visit him," Harry said, sitting on an upturned bucket while Norbert set fire to Hagrid's tablecloth and Hagrid beat it out with the fond distraction of a parent. "Romania's not far from my family. My grandmother has cousins there. They keep a cursed vault. And Hagrid..." He waited until the big man looked at him. "You didn't lose the egg in a card game to a stranger who happened to want the third floor. He gave it to you on purpose to get you talking about what guards the stone. You were used. I'm telling you not to make you feel foolish, but so you'll know it wasn't your fault, and so the next stranger who's very interested in your business over a friendly drink finds you a good deal harder to open." He put a hand on the enormous arm. "You were kind to me from the first day when a lot of people just wanted the story. I don't forget that. You're on the list now. People on the list get warned about strangers and invited for the summer and never once left in a burning hut alone. Bring Norbert's first shed scale when he sheds. My sister wants to see if it takes an edge." Hagrid cried hugely and without shame, and crushed all three of them in an embrace that cracked something in Ron, and gave Harry a lumpy parcel of rock cakes that could have stopped a troll, and stood in the door of his burning hut waving as they went back up to the castle, comforted past his own understanding, because a boy from a family of monsters had told him that being gentle was not the same as being weak, and that the monstrous things loved the gentle ones best, and Hagrid, who was both at once and had never known what to do with it, carried that up the hill and kept it. They went home the next morning, all of them, and the platform at King's Cross had never seen anything like the departure. Ron and Hermione and Neville came to see Harry off, and Harry did the thing his family had taught him, which was to keep the people he had chosen, out loud and without condition. "You're all coming to the mansion this summer," he told them, and it was not an invitation so much as a statement of settled fact. "Ron, Fester wants to teach you dynamite fishing, wear old clothes and don't tell your mother. Hermione, my sister, has read every book in the restricted section and has opinions, and Mother wants to meet the cleverest person I know. Bring a change of clothes and a strong stomach. Neville, we keep a greenhouse of plants that would eat this whole school, and every one of them will love you, because the monstrous things always love the gentle ones best. You'll be happier there than you've ever been." And he meant all of it, and they knew he meant it, because Harry Adams did not spend words he did not mean, and the three of them went home for the summer already counting the days, because they had been, each in their own way, a little overlooked, and had been found on a train by a boy who did not overlook anyone. The Adams family boarded the Scarlet engine in a rolling tide of black, and the platform hushed and watched them go, and did not fully exhale until the train had pulled out. Harry sat by the window with Thing on his collar and his family filling the compartment, Fester already asleep with a light bulb still faintly glowing in his mouth. Gomez and Morticia holding hands beneath a black traveling rug, Grandmama going through her spoils, Pugsley cataloging the summer's ambitions, and Wednesday across from him, upright and exact, watching the country roll south toward home. You did well, Wednesday told him as the castle sank behind the hills, for a first year. You kept your composure, you refused the hot way, you counted your friends and brought them all out, you made the smiling old man show his work, and you took his secret out of his hands. She considered. There will be more. The thing that fled is not finished, and neither is he, not really. A man who has been that certain for that long does not become honest in a morning. So we're not done, but that's next year's intelligence. She looked at him, the boy she had claimed from a coffin when she was 7 and he was 15 months old, and had spent 10 years making into the most dangerous and least frightening thing in any room. Welcome to the family business, Harry. It's mostly this. Loving the overlook so hard that the cold, hungry things can't get a grip on any of us. It's not complicated. It's just very difficult, and almost no one is willing to do it all the way, and that is the whole of why we win. The train ran south through a country going gold with summer, and carried the strangest and most dangerous and most thoroughly loved boy in Britain home, to the black house on the hill that had wanted him first, where a man-eating plant was waiting to hear about his year, and a whole family had spent the term counting the days, and Harry sat among them in the rocking dark of the compartment. The beacon warm at his throat, and the picture of his first parents over his heart, and the certainty of his second family packed inside him where nothing cold would ever reach, and he was not, and would never again be, a boy left out in the rain. He was an Adams. He had been one since the night they found the basket. And an Adams, whatever else the world made of him, is a person who has been decided upon out loud forever by people who will drive 400 miles through a church to reach him, and who will never, not once, not for any prophecy or any greater good or any smiling old man's careful plan, leave him anywhere alone. The house came up black against the summer evening as the hearse climbed the drive from the station, and Lurch opened the door before they reached it, and the whole warm, impossible lot of them went in together out of the last of the light, because the Adamses did nothing important alone, and coming home after everything was the most important thing of all. Harry went to Cleopatra first, before he had even taken off his traveling cloak, because some homecomings are owed to the oldest friends. The conservatory was as he had left it, moonlit and green and breathing, and the great man-eating plant that had introduced itself to him when he was 15 months old, and let his small hand rest against her jaws, leaned toward him the moment he came through the door, swaying, glad in the wordless way of monstrous honest things. Harry sat down on the cold tiles in front of her, as he had 1,000 times, and told her about his year. He told her about the hat that could not sort him, and the ghosts that were starved for courtesy, and the troll and the duel and the dive past sense in front of the screaming stadium. He told her about the black fire that did not burn the calm, and the mirror that had nothing to offer a boy who wanted nothing, and the cold, hungry thing that could not bear to touch a child who had been loved all the way through. And Cleopatra listened, swaying, and when he was done she bent her terrible jaws down, slow, and did not bite, and let his hand rest against the green a moment, as she had the first night, and something between them was agreed, again as it was agreed every homecoming, that the honest monsters and the loved boy were the same kind of thing, and always would be. The family found him there an hour later, all of them, drawn to the conservatory the way they were drawn to each other, and they did not interrupt. They only came in one by one and settled around him in the green moonlight, Fester on the floor with his back against a planter, Morticia and Gomez in the doorway hand in hand, Grandmama in the good chair, Pugsley on the sill, and Wednesday cross-legged beside her brother, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, which for Wednesday was an embrace. No one said very much. There was nothing that needed saying. The war was not over, and the smiling old man was not finished, and the cold thing was not dead, and all of that was true, and all of it was next year's intelligence, and none of it could touch tonight the simple greenlit fact of a family gathered whole around its youngest in the house that had wanted him first. Fester broke the quiet eventually, because Fester always did. "Best day of the year this," he said softly to no one, to everyone, as he had said it on 100 Sunday mornings. "Best day of the year, he came home. He came home," Morticia agreed from the doorway. And Harry Potter Adams sat in the green moonlight among the strangest and most dangerous and most thoroughly loving people in the world, with a man-eating plant leaning fond against his shoulder, and his whole family gathered close and the beacon warm at his throat, and he understood, all the way down to the floor they had built under him before he could speak, the one thing they had been telling him since the night of the rain. That he was wanted out loud without condition forever by every creature in that house, including the house, and that this was not a small thing or a soft thing, but the single most powerful fact in his possession, the thing that had opened every trap and gentled every monster and driven the coldest hungry thing in the world shrieking into the dark. He was home. He was theirs. He always had been, since the basket, since the rain. And somewhere far to the north, an old man kept a promise and destroyed a stone alone in an empty office. And somewhere farther still, a less-than-ghost fled through the dark, nursing a wound that would not close. The memory of a woman in black who did not raise her voice, and a girl who touched him once with a fencing foil, and a boy who wanted nothing he could offer. And neither of them, the old man nor the ghost, would ever fully understand what they had lost to, because neither of them had ever once been willing to do the difficult, ordinary, world-ending thing that the family in the black house did every single day without thinking it remarkable at all. They loved him. That was the whole of it. That was the weapon and the shield and the story. That was the difference in the rain. Chapter 7 end.